Chapter 1260. It had always been Jiang Pingji who angered people to death. When had others ever angered her? The battle in Sangzhou seemed to be losing ground, but everything was within Feng Jin's expectations. Yuan Xan was still unaware that he had fallen into the enemy's trap. He sent Huang Song 3 reports of victory. The contents of the reports exaggerated his role and deducted Nie Sun's contribution. He admitted that Nie Sun was indeed very smart, but he had personally led the troops to kill the enemy and attack the city. He had done it with his sword and spear. Nie Sun had only moved his lips from beginning to end. Did he want to take most of the credit? Yuan Xan was naturally unwilling, but he had learned his lesson. He knew that Huang Song did not like him to be a spy and snitch. Other than deducting Nie Sun's credit, he did not say anything bad about Nie Sun. Nie Sun was aware of his little tricks. He did not express his discomfort. The reports of victory came one after another. A few small victories dispelled the dark clouds in everyone's hearts. Huang Song felt the huge rock on his shoulders lighten a lot. It seems that Lu Shi is seriously ill. According to Feng Ju's impression of Jiang Pingji, this person was not willing to suffer any losses. If something had not really happened, how could he have allowed Sangzhou to suffer continuous losses? Not only was there no movement in Sangzhou, but the main forces were also becoming more and more conservative. They were like turtles huddled together, passive and lazy. In the eyes of outsiders, it was because Jiang Pingji, the backbone, had fallen ill that they were without a leader. That was why they used this method to delay time. Cheng Jing still had doubts, but when he saw Yuan Xian's successive reports of victory, he could not help but wonder if he was thinking too much. Could it be that Lu Shi had traumatized him so much that he viewed him as so terrifying? The people in the tent had long been dazzled by Jiang Pingji's words. Although they were not people who were eager for quick success, they did not want to see such a good opportunity be delayed. They all came out to persuade Huang Song. As the saying went, once the opportunity is missed, it will never come again. If they did not take advantage of Jiang Pingji's serious illness to attack Hu County and Wanzhou, could they wait until she recovered to confront them openly? Huang Song believed it. Now that most of the people in the tent were in favor of sending troops, he did not hesitate. Jiang Pingji's territory was vast and the battle line was long, so it was not suitable for her to provide support. Huang Song occupied Hejin County, so it was very convenient for him to divide his troops to attack. Not long after, the army received a secret report. Lu Shi dispatched 50,000 troops to reinforce Sangzhou. Cheng Jing and the others shook their heads when they heard this. Although Yuan Xian had taken over a county in Sangzhou, the front lines had not completely collapsed yet. Now that they had sent 50,000 reinforcements, it was clear that their enemies were panicking. Although these 50,000 troops could stabilize the occupation of Sangzhou, they would also put Wanzhou and Hu County in danger. They all knew that Jiang Pingji was taking the route of an elite army. She only had about 200,000 to 300,000 troops. Dispatching 50,000 men to assist Sangzhou was equivalent to sending 30% of his troops to Sangzhou. Huang Song made a prompt decision to split his forces to attack Hu County and Wanzhou. Feng Ju was in charge of the battlefront in Wanzhou, while he himself was in charge of attacking Hu County. Jiang Pingji's side only defended and did not attack. Although the line of defense had not been breached, they had fallen into a passive situation. Hu County was overseen by Qing Yuan and Meng Heng, while Luo Yu commanded the troops and promoted several new generals. The situation was in a stalemate. Luo Yu was originally a commander of the Imperial Guards of Dongqing. Later he was forcibly lured by Jiang Pingji onto the pirate ship. He simply resumed his old job in Xiangyang district of Wanzhou. All these years, he had been in charge of the security of the surrounding area. Luo Yu's efforts behind the scenes could not be ignored for so many years of peace in Wanzhou. It was too easy. At the same time, some of the generals were promoted and developed, but he was still in the same place. If it were not for the lack of manpower in Hu County, he would not have wanted to go to the front lines this time. Leading troops to war could cost lives. He just wanted to live comfortably. What Luo Yu lacked was not ability. If he was really incompetent, he would not have been able to become the commander of the Imperial Guards when Dongqing was still around. However, he was inclined to defend. Attacking was not his strong point. Jiang Pingji also knew Luo Yu's problem. She simply asked him to listen to Qing Yuan and Meng Heng's suggestions. She also asked Han Yu, who was squatting in Zhe and Hu counties, to pay close attention to the situation in Hu County. If there was anything wrong, she would directly send troops to restrain Huang Song's troops and try to delay the battle until after the autumn harvest this year. Hu County was a major grain-producing county. This year's autumn harvest might be the most important part of this decisive battle. Hu County had been peaceful for so long. Suddenly, it was under pressure from a large number of troops. The people were in a panic. Luo Yu originally wanted to go out of the city to face the attack, but it was not a solution to keep defending. The people in Hu County were easily shaken. Military counselor Huang Song has been attacking us for several days. It is not a good idea for us to avoid the battle. If it was possible, Luo Yu really wanted to lead his troops out of the city to fight and destroy the enemy's prestige and arrogance. Meng Heng and Qing Yuan were also very helpless because Jiang Pingji's order was to defend, and they could not easily send troops out. Hearing this, Meng Heng could not help but frown. He said unhappily, "It has only been a few days since the battle started. The troops of both sides have not really fought, and the outcome has not been decided. The enemy has not even stepped half a step into Hu County. The enemy is not anxious yet, and we have already begun to retreat? Who is causing trouble behind our backs?" Hu County had a lot of grain reserves. They were not afraid of a war of attrition. It had only been a few days. Why was there someone stirring up trouble already? Luo Yu also did not understand. War was not a matter of 1 or 2 days. It was normal for a tug-of-war to last for half a year or even several months. It was the first time he saw someone so impatient. "I will send people to investigate. I will not let the culprit go if he is caught." Meng Heng said, "I will have to trouble General Luo to take care of this matter." Luo Yu sent people to investigate in secret. He caught a few people who were spreading rumors and killed them in public to correct the situation. After killing a few people who were spreading rumors, the morale of the army was stabilized. After this incident, Meng Heng smelled something different. He asked Luo Yu to kill a few people, and the others who were more well hidden were secretly watching them. Luo Yu did not understand. Why not kill these people too? Leaving them alive is a disaster after all. Meng Heng frowned deeply. He was deep in thought. Qing Yuan, who was beside him, helped to explain. "Naturally, it is to cast a long line to catch a big fish. Our Lord has given us a death order to defend Hu County. We must not suffer any losses." Both sides have been in a stalemate at the border of Hu County for a few days. Under the situation where we have yet to show any signs of defeat, someone has taken the opportunity to stir up trouble and spread rumors that our army will definitely lose, shaking the morale of the army. "Officer Luo, don't you think this is a little strange? It is never wrong to be more cautious." Meng Heng and Qing Yuan were cautious people. They did not seek to be meritorious but to not make mistakes. Meng Heng was also older and more mature than Qing Yuan. It was not wrong to listen to him. Luo Yu said, "Isn't the morale of the army shaken because our Lord announced to the public that she is seriously ill? She was so ill that she was about to die. She did not even have an heir. It would be strange if those who did not know the truth did not panic." Qing Yuan shook his head and asked Luo Yu, "Officer Luo, what do you think of the army in our Lord's tent?" Chapter 1261. This wasn't a brainless boast. Luo Yu truly believed that the so-called elite troops under the Lord's tent were far inferior to them. Not only were they extremely mobile, but their combat quality was also the highest he'd ever seen in his life. One of the main reasons he was able to maintain such good security in Wanzhou was because of the strength of the troops under his command. If that's the case, when the Lord is seriously ill and there are foreign invaders, they should be riled up and swear to annihilate the enemy instead of being afraid to fight and spreading rumors, Qing Yuan said. "I suspect that these people are being manipulated, and the mastermind behind the scenes is the main culprit. How could they feel at ease if they didn't dig out the hidden dangers? They were fighting anxiously at the front, and if someone suddenly stabbed them in the back it would be over." Luo Yu's eyes turned cold and he said solemnly, "The two counselors are really thoughtful." He took this matter to heart and sent people to keep a close eye on those people in secret. After a few days there was progress. After following the clues, Luo Yu was shocked by the information he found. When he took a closer look, he was so angry that his beard was about to fly up. He hurriedly suppressed his boiling anger and sent someone to discuss it with Luo Yu and Meng Heng. The soldier who spread the rumors was a local grain transport worker recruited from Hu County. What did a grain transport worker do? They were mainly responsible for the supply of logistics and ensuring the continuation of the battle. If there was a problem with the grain supply, how could the frontline soldiers fight the war? The two counselors probably wouldn't have guessed who was secretly contacting them. Luo Yu's gaze was deep and his tone was solemn. His clenched fists and tensed veins exposed his current state of mind. Meng Heng and Qing Yuan looked at each other and asked in unison, "Who is it?" Luo Yu pointed at the position of the sand table. The two looked and saw that it was right inside Hu County. The same word popped up in their minds and their faces darkened. How could it be a mole? There were no signs before this. Fortunately, they discovered it early. If they waited for the two sides to really enter a stalemate and the mole stabbed them again, they would be dead. Luiyue said with a sullen face, I heard that Hu County is what it is today because of the old master. When the old master was appointed as the county governor of Hu County, he had spent a great deal of effort in order to rectify the local bandits that ran amok and the landowning families that seized the people's farmland. These landowning households have learned their lesson and have been behaving themselves all these years. They've watched as so much fertile land returned to the common people, but they haven't tasted the sweetness themselves. It's not like they haven't borne a grudge in their hearts. Before Lu Shi became the county chief of Hu County had been a barren land and unruly rivers. Bandits roamed about, the country gentry exploited them, and there were years of drought. Those who could escape had all fled, and those who couldn't had all accepted their fate. It was like hell on earth. The local powers were used to being the local tyrants. They refused to accept that there was someone controlling them. 9 successive prefectural governors died in office or on the way to their new posts. Some died in the hands of bandits, some died in their plots, and some died in collusion with officials and bandits. Not only did Lu Shi survive, but he also forcibly opened the mouths of the local powers. He personally took a lot of benefits from them and distributed them to the common people. He reclaimed wasteland, dug water sources, and changed tax policies. Under his rule, Hu County became a major grain-producing county in Dongqing. The local landowning households and the country gentry also benefited from this, but they weren't satisfied because the common people and the land they farmed were their property. If Lu Shi hadn't interfered, the income generated from these properties would have been theirs. In other words, Lu Shi had taken away their interests, and it wasn't just a little. However, the situation was stronger than they were. They couldn't defeat Lu Shi, so they could only swallow their grievances. Now that the enemy was at the gates of the city, it was a good time to take advantage of the chaos to redistribute. Feng Ju, who worked under Huang Song, was quite cunning. He had already sent spies to Hu County to investigate before the war started. He knew that Hu County wasn't as united as a piece of iron. People's faces were flushed with wine, and people's hearts were moved by money. Feng Ju firmly grasped their weakness and used it as a breakthrough to incite defection. However, these people weren't really stupid. People who pursued benefits were always very precise when it came to calculating gains and losses. On one hand, they kept Huang Song in suspense, but on the other, they behaved themselves. Their attitudes were quite ambiguous, and they didn't offend either side. Who knew that Jiang Pingji would actually fall ill? He was bedridden and didn't have an heir. His situation was terrible. Sangzhou had lost, and Huang Song's forces had taken over a county. The battlefront in Wanzhou and Hu County were passively attacked. From the looks of it, Huang Song's side was in a good situation. Even God was on his side. At this moment, these speculators began to panic. If war was compared to business, they would invest in the early stages and naturally have to plunder the spoils of war to make up for the expenses in the later stages. Fighting the local tyrants was the best choice. If they didn't do something now, would Huang Song let go of their property when he really attacked Hu County? He would definitely slaughter them. Some forces in Hu County secretly sided with Huang Song without hesitation. Although they didn't help Huang Song much, they sent people to spread rumors and shake the army's morale. This was considered a deposit and a demonstration of their attitude. When the situation of the war gradually became clear and Huang Song developed, they would increase their investment until they completely sided with him. The investment was risky, but the returns were great. If they gambled correctly, the prosperity of the family was just around the corner. Luiyue only found out this much, but it already made him extremely angry. I only hate that the old master didn't kill them all back then. Why didn't he slaughter all these troublemakers? Luiyue's tone was quite harsh. Anyone who knew that someone was going to stab them in the back would feel uncomfortable. If they were killed earlier, it wouldn't be so disgusting today. Meng Heng's eyes slanted and he said softly, General Luiyue, be careful with your words. How could he speak ill of the Lord's father? If this got out, wouldn't Luiyue be afraid that he would make things difficult for him? Luiyue's face darkened and he kept his mouth shut. Hold back for now and collect evidence of their betrayal and collusion with the enemy. Once we have the evidence, we'll lock them up and wait for the Lord to deal with them. Meng Heng looked calm on the surface, but he was gritting his teeth in anger. He didn't believe that with his lord's hot temper, she could tolerate such a shameful betrayal. Luiyue thought that Meng Heng wanted to be lenient and was instantly unhappy. Qing Yuan reminded him, think about the group of people in Chongzhou. When Jiang Pingji first arrived in Chongzhou, there was a bloody incident as soon as she landed. The leaders of a few large clans were killed by her. Although the members of the clan were not affected, they were suppressed to the point where they could not lift their heads. The entire clan could only live with their tails between their legs. How many years had it been? They had fallen to an unimaginable level. As long as the Lord was strong, the few clans in Chongzhou who had offended her could forget about rising again in this lifetime. On the contrary, the Cui family of Chongzhou had good foresight. They clung to the Lord's golden thighs and used the rice paper to accumulate a rich family fortune. Back then, they only killed a few leaders because the Lord had forcefully shifted the blame to the evidence of collusion with the enemy. The group of short-sighted fools in Hu County. Once the evidence was conclusive, wouldn't they turn their entire clan upside down? Meng Heng said in a low voice, "The Lord has a strong temper. If this matter reaches her ears, she won't be able to tolerate it if she doesn't kill a bunch of them." Tolerate? Hehe, I'll give them 3 consecutive Taoist pampering. Chapter 1262. Luo Yu thought of his lord's firecracker temper and changed his attitude instantly. Not only was he not as angry as before, but he also pitied the local bully of Hu County. Of all the times to court death, why did she have to do it at this juncture? Even if she was in a hurry to reincarnate, she shouldn't be in such a hurry. Outsiders thought that their lord was seriously ill, but they, as her confidants, knew very well that not only was the lord not sick, but she was also full of anger and wanted to chop people up. Pretending to be sick and taking a detour to attack Huang Song's base camp. Such an operation was out of this world. Other than kneeling and cheering for her, the salted fish could only watch from the sidelines. Don't talk, watch her carry the whole game. Jiang Pingji swaggered with 50,000 troops to take a detour under Huang Song's nose to annihilate the retreat route. Songzhou suffered successive defeats, and the situation was critical. Jiang Pingji simply took advantage of the situation and led 50,000 troops to attack Songzhou. On the surface she was going to Songzhou, but in reality she was going to the north for a while, along the Song River in Songzhou to attack Huang Song's Qinzhou. Huang Song's troops landed on the shore of the Gorge River in the middle and lower reaches of the Song River and attacked Songzhou. The tens of thousands of troops gradually entered the hinterland of Songzhou. They were still immersed in the successive victories and could not react for a while, let alone turn around to support Qinzhou, which was adjacent to Songzhou. Huang Song's base was in Haozhou. Qinzhou had only been under operation for a year or two, so its defense was naturally not as stable as Haozhou's base camp. She had previously shot herself in the foot by pretending to be sick and bedridden. That feeling was like being in prison. Now that she was out leading troops, she could let go of herself. Even the tips of her eyebrows were dyed with joy, and the surrounding atmosphere seemed friendly and casual. She was dressed in a red and white military uniform, riding a horse and galloping. The tail feathers on her helmet were pressed low by the strong wind that was blowing against her. Wuxia er Xiaolong Bao. I don't know why, but seeing the streamer so excited, I feel like I've seen a husky. Ishio Xiniangxiang, I agree with the one above, and she's a husky who's out for fresh air. Puchi Pusixio, I agree with the one above and she's a husky who's out for fresh air. Ainen Bao Bao good, don't be like this of our streamer? If you say that, I don't dare to look at the streamer's beauty. Bao Bao Lao's Hui Tang, a husky's pillow is nothing. Bao Bao Lai Kai Tang, what's the big deal about a husky bolster? Bao Bao had entered a silly group. A group of people were exchanging their experiences in raising live streamers. Everyone in their world knew about Jiang Pingji's streaming room. The officials stepped forward to open an official Weibo account and specially assign people to manage it. The number of fans had already reached 1 billion. Adding up the 2 planes, it was at least 1.5 billion. It was clear how terrifying her popularity was. A while ago, Jiang Pingji mobilized 50,000 troops and horses to counterattack. The official blog post mischievously changed the profile picture to that of a husky who was happily riding a horse. The husky wore a red and white military uniform, and its tail feathers fluttered in the wind. It looked as if it was finally able to breathe fresh air. The resemblance was so great that people could not help but laugh. The new avatar received unanimous praise from the fans, and at the same time, it also stimulated the enthusiasm of the fans to raise a husky. They couldn't get close to Jiang Pingji, but they could raise a husky that looked like the streamer. Jiang Pingji was speechless. She felt that she was very naughty, but compared to this group of idle fish in the audience, there seemed to be a gap. Thanks to the jesting of the group of salted fish, Jiang Pingji's march did not seem boring. Instead, it was enjoyable. Ouch, my old waist, it almost broke. Jing Rong, come over and take a look. Yang Si was asked by Jiang Pingji to follow the army. The 7 to 8 days of rapid travel had made him suffer a lot. The road was difficult to travel on, and the galloping horse carriage almost made him tremble with bitterness. For the sake of his life he chose to ride a horse. He used the softest and most comfortable horse harness, but after a day of jolting, his legs were so weak that they did not feel like they belonged to him. Not only did his thighs hurt, but his buttocks and waist also hurt. He felt as if he was being dismantled and reassembled. After this battle, he finally knew his position in his lord's heart. Wei Si could represent his lord to attend the funeral of the old lord in Hejian County. Yang Si was not jealous. After all, this treatment was obtained by Wei Si, sacrificing himself to feed the devil. Why could Qiguan Rang stay at the front lines of Wanzhou to stop the troops led by Feng Ju, but he had to be carried by his lord to run around the front lines? Could it be that Qiguan Rang was good at scheming but he was not? He really did not want to run around with his lord. Wei Si was his lord's cotton-padded jacket. Qiguan Rang was her best friend. Only he was an omnipotent brick. He would move wherever he was lacking. He had everything but he did not have human rights. Yang Si was full of complaints. He did not know how many times he had complained in the past few days, but he did not dare to say it in front of Jiang Pingji. He could only observe in secret, occasionally looking at her with a resentful and pitiful gaze. Jiang Pingji did not care about the actor Yang Si, but the idle spectators would not ignore his performance. Some busybodies counted for Yang Si to see how many times he had to watch it before he could attract Jiang Pingji's attention. The more the idle spectators behaved like this, the more Jiang Pingji ignored Yang Si's gaze. Yang Si was speechless. Hugging myself tightly with heartache. JPG Yang Si had enough rest. He stood up with his hands on his knees. He walked awkwardly to a position one step behind Jiang Pingji. With the advantage of the cavalry, they directly broke through the border defense line of Qinzhou. From now on they had to be careful with every step they took. This was the enemy's territory, and their logistics and food supply lines were not abundant. They could not be too reckless. It will take at least half a month for Huang Song's side to react. Yang Si estimated the distance between the two places and came up with a rough figure in his heart. Half a month. Jiang Pingji rubbed her chin and said with a smile, "It's about time. Let's have some fun in this half a month. We came all the way to Bogeo's territory. The host should do as the guest pleases. If we go back empty-handed without doing anything, wouldn't that be too disrespectful to the host?" Yang Si secretly curled his lips and sympathized with Huang Song for 3 seconds. The host should do as the guest pleases? Wouldn't his lord turn Qinzhou upside down? Qinzhou's garrison forces were weak. Of the 50,000 troops that his lord had brought, 10% were cavalry. The rest were elites with strong physical qualities. If they really wanted to have fun, Qinzhou would not last at all. Jiang Pingji had outflanked Qinzhou, which was behind Huang Song, not to expand the results of the battle or anything else. To put it bluntly, she was there to cause trouble. Huang Song was fighting at the front lines, so she turned his nest upside down. It was not easy to take advantage of her. Most of the time she had to pay the price with her life. Relying on her strong mobility, Jiang Pingji really did what she said she would. She caused trouble in every place and left with the spoils of war. When the logistics and food supply lines were insufficient, she used the battle to support the battle. She robbed the food that had been stored in various important towns, fighting while plundering. By the time the urgent report reached Huang Song's ears, Jiang Pingji had already occupied a small part of Qinzhou. She carried all the food that could be taken away in the supply wagons. What could not be taken away was thrown to the people of Qinzhou as a gift. If it were someone else, they would definitely bring people to destroy the cultivated land, but Jiang Pingji could not do such a wicked thing. She would leave the fertile land for them. Anyway, Qinzhou would be hers in the end. She could not be too ruthless. What? Huang Song almost suspected that he was hearing things. When did 50,000 troops appear and go to Qinzhou? Chapter 1263. Who would have thought that the troops that were supposed to support Sangzhou would go straight to Qinzhou? Qing Jing and the others couldn't be blamed for not thinking about it. Jiang Pingji had thrown out too many smoke bombs. She was willing to give up Sangzhou as a county to deceive the enemy and affect their judgment. How could a normal person think of such a ruthless method to kill 1,000 enemies while sacrificing 800 men? She was a living lunatic. Huang Song wasn't Jiang Pingji. The latter had a large family business and was willing to give up Sangzhou, but the former couldn't ignore Qinzhou. He could either send troops to support Qinzhou or let Yuan Xian, who was closest to him, lead troops to outflank Jiang Pingji's retreat. Faced with these two choices, even a blind man would know which one to choose. Qing Jing said, "Distant water can't put out a nearby fire. I'm afraid the Lord won't make it in time if he leads the troops back now." Huang Song sighed and said, "I know, so I can only let Lieutenant Yuan Xan lead the troops to encircle and suppress them." Fortunately, he let Nye Sun follow the troops. Otherwise, Yuan Xan would have suffered a great loss in Jiang Pingji's hands. Yuan Xan received the news one step earlier than Huang Song. He was so angry that he wanted to rush to Jiang Pingji and tear her into pieces. Of course, Jiang Pingji was still a patient. They didn't know that she was the general leading the troops. But this didn't affect Yuan Xian's strong urge to skin her alive and break her bones. "You're making me so angry." Yuan Xan was so angry that he smashed the table into two. Even the great victory not long ago couldn't make him feel happy. It was a great shame and humiliation for his own home to be attacked by the enemy like there was no man's land. After smashing the table, Yuan Xan picked up his weapon angrily, but he was stopped by Nye Sun before he could take 2 steps. "General, what are you going to do?" Nye Sun couldn't let Yuan Xan do whatever he wanted. What if he ran into the enemy's trap? Yuan Xan narrowed his eyes. His fierce eyes looked more dangerous, making Nye Sun feel like he was being stared at by a beast. "Military counselor, what do you think I'm going to do?" "Of course I'm going to count the troops and kill them. Are we going to let that thief continue to wreak havoc in Qinzhou?" Huang Song only had Haozhou and Qinzhou. He couldn't compare to Jiang Pingji's large family business. They couldn't afford to lose any of them. They had let down their guard and allowed Jiang Pingji to take advantage of their weakness, causing the defense line at the rear to fall. Fortunately, it was not too late to mend the pen after the sheep were lost. Nye Sun's heart skipped a beat. With a pale face he advised, "General, you can't." "You can't?" Yuan Xan didn't expect that Nye Sun would say such words. Instantly he was so angry that his eyes almost split open and he pushed Nye Sun away. Nye Sun was caught off guard and fell backwards. The atmosphere at the scene immediately froze. Yuan Xan's hand was stretched out in mid-air, and a trace of regret flashed in his eyes. No matter how reckless he was, he knew that scholars were not as thick-skinned as martial artists. Scholars were extremely arrogant, and that action just now was a great humiliation. "Military advisor Nye, I didn't mean it. I really didn't mean it. Please forgive me, military advisor. I hope that a great man will forgive me." Yuan Xan's anger was temporarily suppressed, and he hurriedly took remedial measures, reaching out his hand to help Nye Sun up. At this moment Nye Sun was also furious. He flicked his sleeve and slapped Yuan Xan's hand away. His eyes were bloodshot, making the color of the cinnabar between his brows even darker. Yuan Xan was very embarrassed. He didn't mean to push Nye Sun. Nye Sun was a man after all. How could Nye Sun not even stand properly and fall so hard with just one push? Nye Sun's tone was extremely cold. "May I ask, General, if you're bringing troops back to Qinzhou now, are you going to cross the Gorge River?" Yuan Xan said matter-of-factly, "Of course I'm going to cross the river." Nye Sun asked again, "Does it take time to cross the river? If we cross to the middle of the river, what if the enemy attacks us from both sides?" Yuan Xan felt that Nye Sun's words were exaggerated. "Military advisor, you're worrying too much. The enemy in Sangzhou isn't a threat, and the enemy in Qinzhou can't care about us right now. If the enemy is smart, they won't even have time to escape. Why would they specifically guard the riverbank of the Gorge River?" He couldn't stand Nye Sun praising others' morale and belittling his own. It was as if he was weak no matter how good others were. Nye Sun's already ugly expression became even more unfriendly. He originally thought that Yuan Xan's act of offering a humble apology was sincere repentance, but now it seemed that even a dog couldn't stop itself from eating shit. Nye Sun rarely cursed in his heart. No matter how bad his teammates were, as a strategist he had to fulfill his duties and obligations. He had to pinch his nose and force himself to communicate with Yuan Xan, the blockhead. Apart from worrying about being trapped in the Gorge River and beaten to death, Nye Sun also had to let Yuan Xan remember what a military order was. Without a specific military order from his lord Huang Song, he couldn't act rashly. So what if Qinzhou was in danger? Yuan Xan's task was to restrain the troops in Sangzhou and attract Jiang Pingji's main forces. If he acted willfully and arbitrarily transferred troops, once the entire plan was ruined, could he shoulder the responsibility alone? As a general, not only did he have to listen to his lord's orders, but he also had to be responsible for his troops. If Yuan Xan acted willfully because of loyalty, he wouldn't even know how he died one day. Nye Sun suppressed his anger. He had no choice but to break down all logic and force it onto Yuan Xan. If this rash and boorish martial artist still refused to listen to his advice, he really couldn't do anything about it. Because Nie Sun mentioned Huang Song, Yuan Xan had no way to vent his anger. He could only listen obediently. In the end, he reluctantly agreed to Nie Sun's arrangements. The relationship between the two of them that they had worked so hard to ease immediately became tense. It seemed like nothing much, but in reality, undercurrents were surging and they were as incompatible as fire and water. Nie Sun asked Yuan Xan to count his troops and retreat as he fought. He would slowly let go of the counties in Sangzhou that he had previously conquered. At the same time, he sent troops to observe the situation in the Gorge River to avoid the worst-case scenario of being attacked from both sides. Reality proved that Nie Sun's caution was not without reason. Jiang Pingji also had the idea of making dumplings out of dumplings. She had already sent people to keep an eye on the Gorge River. In other words, if Yuan Xan dared to come, she dared to fight. She would definitely make sure that Yuan Xan and his troops would never return. Feng Jin also felt that it was a pity. Yuan Xan is a man of martial arts but no brains. He's stubborn and arrogant. With a little misdirection, he won't be able to find his bearings. Nie Sun, on the other hand, is a bit tricky. My lord is still too kind. If she had killed Nie Sun back then, Nie Sun and Huang Song would be completely at odds. Everyone in Wanzhou knew that Nie Sun and Meng Heng were brothers. They also knew that Meng Heng had followed Jiang Pingji's instructions to set up a trap for his brother. When that time came, the Lord would lead the troops to block the banks of the Gorge River and block Yuan Xan's way forward. He would lead the troops to block Yuan Xan's way back. It was a perfect strategy to make dumplings out of dumplings. However, Nie Sun, who was on Yuan Xan's side, was not easily fooled. He could almost see the tacit understanding between Feng Jin and Jiang Pingji at a glance. Meng Hun had been working under Jiang Pingji for a long time. He had even worked under the Mengs before. He was very clear about the grudges between them. He said regretfully, "No matter what, Nie Sun is Shurjio's biological brother and my lord's cousin. If he were to kill him, my lord would not be able to explain it to the old mistress." Chapter 1264. As the saying goes, if the mountain is not me, I will be the mountain. Even if Yuan Xan wanted to hide, he had to see if Feng Jin was willing to let him go. Did he want to leave after taking advantage of the situation and flaunting his power? How could Nie Sun know Sangzhou better than Meng Hun? Meng Hun was born and raised in Sangzhou. However, Nie Sun was difficult to deal with. He had to think of a way to make him lower his guard. Feng Jin's eyes flashed. He had an idea. Meng Hun had been with these strategists for a long time. He more or less understood the rules. "Do you have a plan?" Feng Jin smiled. "It's not difficult. Nie Sun will definitely be on guard when he passes by the river. It won't be easy for us to succeed. Since that's the case, why don't we let them cross the river smoothly? When they engage in close combat with the Lord, we will follow closely behind and cross the river to cut off their retreat route." Many feudal lords would seize suitable crossings when they were at war. This was to ensure that their side would not be harassed by the enemy when they crossed the river. Everyone knew the saying, "Attack halfway across the river." That was why armies were always cautious when they encountered a river. Nie Sun was no exception. Everyone knew that the process of crossing the river would be affected. If it was light, the army would be injured. If it was heavy, the entire army would be annihilated. The most typical example was the battle between Jiang Pingji and the northern borderline. The entire northern borderline was trapped. Nie Sun was not as stupid as the northern borderline. According to normal thinking, Feng Jin should follow closely behind and wait for Yuan Xan's army to cross the river before launching a surprise attack. Nie Sun would definitely be on guard against this. Even if Feng Jin succeeded, the results would be minimal. Since that was the case, they might as well do the opposite. They would let Yuan Xan's army cross the river. Then they would send troops to occupy the river crossings and block their retreat route. When Yuan Xan and Jiang Pingji's troops met, the front was tense and the back was empty. Then they would stab them. The same plan, but the order was reversed. The results were completely different. On the other side, under Nie Sun's earnest persuasion, Yuan Xan could only retreat with his troops, leaving only a portion of his troops to guard the battlefield. The journey was peaceful. There were no unexpected incidents. Everything about the military advisor is good, except for the bad habit of exaggerating and raising other people's morale while diminishing your own prestige. The troops of Sangzhou are weak. What's there to worry about? Along the way, weren't there only defeated soldiers and generals? The huge Cangzhou is like a piece of paper that will break with one poke. Yuan Xen sat on the back of a large horse, grumbling unhappily to the deputy generals on both sides, his rough face full of impatience. The enemy was clearly so weak, but Nie Sun still had to act as if he was facing a great enemy. He even made Yuan Xen unable to do anything, which was very annoying. The two deputy generals beside him looked embarrassed. Their words carried little weight, and they were also Yuan Xen's deputy generals, so it was not good for them to speak up for Nie Sun. Troubled times were a good time for generals to make a name for themselves. The two deputy generals had both risen through the ranks by virtue of their military exploits, but they couldn't compare to Yuan Xen, who was a relative of the lords. There were some things that Yuan Xen could say without the slightest scruple, but the two deputy generals could not say so casually, lest they cause trouble and make enemies. Although they also felt that Nie Sun was making a mountain out of a molehill, the military counselor's words definitely made sense. There was nothing wrong with listening more. On the other hand, his general's temper was like a firecracker. He would explode at the slightest provocation and lose his temper at the slightest provocation. A successful general should be good at listening and have his own opinions. The headstrong Yuan Xen could only do the latter. He directly ignored the former. The two of them could only act as mediators. They tried to smooth things over and not offend anyone. Nie Sun was still some distance away from the vanguard troops, so he didn't hear what they said. But looking at Yuan Xen, he guessed that he couldn't say anything good. After traveling for a few days, they were less than half a day's journey away from Gorge River. The entire army was tense, guarding against any sneak attacks from the enemy. What was the result? Not to mention a sneak attack from the pursuing troops, there wasn't even a shadow. Yuan Xen displayed his prowess in Cangzhou, but he didn't even dare to let out a fart, let alone sneak an attack like Nie Sun had said. After spending half a day crossing the river, when everyone arrived at the opposite bank and got into formation, there was still no sign of the enemy. Yuan Xen looked proud. It was as if he didn't see Nie Sun's expression and deliberately asked. Military counselor, the enemy troops in Cangzhou have been scared out of their wits by us. It seems that they don't even dare to chase after us. Nie Sun said that Feng Jin would lead troops to chase after them, but he didn't. Nie Sun said that Jiang Pingji would lead troops to block their way at Gorge River, but she didn't. Nie Sun said that the enemy would jump out and attack when they crossed the river, but they didn't. Scholars only know how to talk nonsense with their mouths. What else can they do besides talk? Yuan Xen really didn't understand. Nie Sun was a guy who only knew how to talk nonsense. What did he have that made Huang Song think so highly of him? He was very proud now. Nie Sun's mistake meant that his judgment was correct. Nie Sun rode his horse with his head lowered. He didn't say a word for a long time, but his face was pale. Yuan Xen felt bored when he saw that Nie Sun didn't respond. After arriving in Qinzhou, Yuan Xen gathered the remaining troops and sent scouts to find out where Jiang Pingji's troops had wandered off to. Jiang Pingji's group was as slippery as mud loaches. It was very difficult to catch them because they relied on the rogue tactics of using war to sustain war and their strong mobility. Yuan Xen and the others had just crossed Gorge River. Feng Jin started to restore the lost territory and eliminate the 10,000 troops Yuan Xen had left behind. Meng Hun mocked, "You want to defend Song Prefecture with just 10,000 troops? I'm afraid you're too naive." Although Nie Sun used some tricks to create the illusion of 100,000 troops, Feng Jin had long seen through his tricks. Yuan Xen couldn't bear to part with the spoils of war he had just won. He disregarded Nie Sun's opponents and divided the already small number of troops. In other words, he only had 34,000 troops to stop Jiang Pingji. Could they defeat 50,000 elites? How could 10,000 soldiers defend a county? They could barely defend a prefecture. Meng Hun used his fingers to calculate the disparity in military strength between the two armies. He felt that, military counselor, isn't it not good to bully people like this? His lord had 50,000 troops. He and Feng Jin would bring another 15,000 troops. That would be 65,000 against 34,000. The former also had the attribute of a sneak attack and a critical hit. Even if Yuan Xen was fighting on his home ground and had a certain bonus in terms of manpower and logistics, which could increase the number of troops to 50,000 to 60,000, he couldn't stand being trampled on. Feng Jin laughed. "General Meng, if you think it's not good, you can watch from the sidelines and wait for my lord to settle the score." Who didn't know how to watch from the sidelines? Find a spectator stand with a good view, set up a straw shed, hug some fruits and be comfortable. If they dared to do this, how could they explain to their lord that Yuan Xen had gone deep into Tsang Prefecture? Meng Hun also thought of this and made up his mind. It's better for you to die than for me. Meng Hun and the others used the fastest speed to attack their lost territory. At the same time, they seized the crossing of Gorge River and crossed the river to chase after Yuan Xian's army. Chapter 1265. The horses' hooves landed on the ground with a hurried clatter. Report: traces of enemy troops have been discovered 20 miles ahead. The scout in the vanguard galloped over and sighed. He grabbed the reins to stop the warhorse and hurriedly dismounted to report. 20 miles? They're really eager to die. Jiang Pingji sneered. I already know about this. Inform military advisor Yang to come over. Jiang Pingji sent the scout away unhurriedly. She lowered her head and ate half of the roasted lamb leg in her right hand. You have to fight a war, but you have to feed your stomach too. Xinjia, I'm crying from laughing. Streamer, you should at least respect your enemy. They're about to attack. Zuyun Cat Yao, that's why people say that the streamer is too infuriating. The enemy is attacking aggressively, but she's still eating the whole roasted lamb leg. This is a serious battle streaming room, not a gourmet streaming room. Her opponent had to always carry an oxygen tank, or else he wouldn't be able to bear the injury. Why did he have to carry an oxygen tank? Because Jiang Pingji's actions were so coquettish that it was suffocating. Meng Xian, I don't agree with student Xinjia's words. If the streamer respected the enemy and put down the lamb leg, wouldn't she be disrespecting the lamb that contributed its body? The war could be fought any time, but a roasted lamb leg was the most delicious to eat while it was hot. Coincidentally, Jiang Pingji thought so too. Yang Si rushed over in a hurry and happened to see Jiang Pingji gnawing on the shredded meat hanging from the lamb leg and throwing the bones into the fire. She took out a handkerchief to wipe her mouth and the oil on her hands. She looked at him in a leisurely manner. As if she didn't see Yang Si's broken and twisted expression, she said calmly, Jing Rong is here? Yang Si's heart was indeed broken. The roasted lamb was roasted by him and supplemented with various seasonings. It was golden and tender. He didn't even have time to take a bite before he went to the toilet for a while. When he came back, the lamb was brutally dismembered and died without a whole body. All of it went into his lord's stomach. Everyone knew that Yang Si was a foodie. The audience saw him staring at the pile of lamb bones with a solemn expression and laughed unkindly. Jinging, Xiaorong Rong, don't cry. I roasted a whole lamb for 560 renminbi. I'll buy as much as you want. Ragdoll Mao Guliang, sigh, the streamer is getting more and more insane. She even bullies such a cute little angel like Xiaorong Rong. Even though she was condemned by thousands of people, Jiang Pingji's skin was as thick as the corner of the city wall. She had reached the peak of the golden bell shield and the iron shirt. She was truly invulnerable. She said with a natural expression, the enemy is already 20 li away. Jing Rong, do you have any countermeasures? Yang Si secretly took a deep breath and suppressed the urge to strangle his lord. It would be best if he could strangle him to death, but if he couldn't, he would be killed instead. It was not worth it. He said, the enemy has come prepared. It's obvious that they're coming for our army. Since I can't avoid it, I might as well attack head-on. Yang Si was suppressing his anger at this moment. If the enemy foolishly bumped into him, he would be letting himself down if he didn't beat him up. Jiang Pingji said, I think so too. Using current units of measurement, 20 li was about 8,100 meters. This distance could not be considered near, but it could not be considered far either. If it were an ordinary army, this distance would be a little hasty, and they could only hastily engage in battle. On Jiang Pingji's side it was different. She could compress the battle distance to 10 miles. If the enemy launched an attack from 4,000 meters away, the chaotic army could get into formation and prepare for battle during the time when the enemy was charging. 20 li was still a very wide distance for Jiang Pingji. Because they were in someone else's territory, and the weather was not considered hot, the generals and soldiers would not easily take off their armor even when they were resting. When they heard the sound of the horn, all the generals and soldiers immediately tensed up. One by one they grabbed their weapons and ran to gather in formation. Yang Si immediately gave the order to use a military formation that was loose on the outside but tight on the inside to create the illusion that the enemy was fighting in a hurry. After waiting for a while, the gravel lying on the ground jumped because of the ground's vibration. The enemy's footsteps were dull and powerful. Banners fluttered, the wind howled, and the yellow sand flew. Countless figures appeared and disappeared. Qinzhou was Huang Song's territory. While Yuan Xian searched for traces of the enemy, he sent people to gather the remaining soldiers. The total number of troops rose to 50,000. Knowing Jiang Pingji's whereabouts, he did not rush to find her to fight to the death. Instead, he let the entire army rest for 2 days to recover their strength. Yuan Xan was not stupid enough to use an exhausted army to fight the enemy head-on. The enemy is lightly armed and has traveled a long distance to attack Qinzhou. Although there are many of them, there is nothing to be afraid of. Yuan Xan was full of confidence. Fighting a war not only depended on the people, but also on the army's supplies and configuration. Jiang Pingji had led 50,000 troops to attack Qinzhou and stir up trouble here. Naturally, she could not bring weapons of war that had a large target. Not to mention large weapons such as ballistae, scaling ladders and catapults, she certainly did not bring them. The outside world knew that the weapons of Jiang Pingji's army were always more powerful than those of the other feudal vassals. The most typical were the ballistae and catapults. Before the improvement, the ordinary ballistae could only hold one heavy bow, and its range was not far. After Jiang Pingji and the craftsmen under her command improved it, it could hold 6 heavy bows with a range of 600 steps. It was one of the best weapons to seriously injure the cavalry. Needless to say, the catapult was a good weapon for attacking cities. Without these weapons of war, Jiang Pingji's troops could only rely on manpower and the knives, spears, swords and halberds in their hands. No matter how strong a person was, could he fight against 10 people alone? Even if one person could do it, could the whole army do it? Purely in terms of manpower, Yuan Xan and Jiang Pingji's side were not far apart. Including their own weapons of war, their overall chances of winning were high. Yuan Xan drew his sword and ordered, "All troops charge." In order to conserve their strength, the marching speed was not fast. When the distance between the two armies became shorter and shorter, their speed suddenly increased. Thousands of cavalrymen took a detour to outflank them, while the remaining troops charged head-on to intercept and kill. The war drums on the chariots rumbled, and the beating drumbeats pounded hard on the heart. Bang, bang, bang. Each beat was more rapid than the one before, and each beat was heavier than the one before. Their hearts felt as if they were about to jump into their throats and jump out of their throats. Jiang Pingji understood and smiled. Similarly, she drew out the god-slaying sword that had drunk countless blood. Beat the drums, meet the enemy. Yuan Xan laughed heartily. Look at that formation, it's scattered and disorderly. The person leading the troops must be a greenhorn. Jiang Pingji packed lightly and did not bring the heavy ballistae, but Yuan Xan had them. In ancient times, there was no concept of protecting intellectual property. Jiang Pingji used the ballistae and catapults to fight the Qingyi army, laying a solid foundation for her future foundation. The other feudal vassal forces naturally had to find out clearly. Only by knowing oneself and one's enemy could one win 100 battles. It was not some advanced and complicated technology. Even if Jiang Pingji deliberately protected it, other forces could still steal and learn it. Speaking of the ballistae, the dozens of ballistae that Yuan Xan brought with him now were no less powerful than the ones that Jiang Pingji had once used. The arrows had a wooden shaft, an iron spearhead as the arrowhead, and an iron feather as the tail. They were shockingly powerful and had an extremely long range. When the arrows left the bowstring, they buzzed incessantly, like the roar of the god of death. When they hit a person, the huge force could send them flying and pierce through several people's bodies. Seeing this, Yang Si hurriedly stopped Jiang Pingji. Chapter 1266. Yang Si was so scared that his face turned pale. He couldn't stop the willful and reckless lord by himself. Jiang Pingji looked at the situation on the battlefield coldly and said rather amusedly, "Do I look like the kind of person who rushes to die?" Yang Si secretly heaved a sigh of relief. He was mentally prepared for the lord to rush forward with little white regardless of anything else. Yang Si was really not used to her suddenly being so obedient and docile. However, Jiang Pingji said, "I discovered something different when I pretended to be sick this time." Yang Si looked at her in confusion and began to mutter in his heart. What did the lord learn from the incident of pretending to be sick? Was she so abnormal? In the past, she was indifferent when he tried to persuade her. Now that he was about to give up hope, she actually learned to be obedient. Jiang Pingji smiled and said nothing. It had been almost 10 years since she came to this era. On the surface, she seemed to adapt well, like an ordinary person from ancient times who had gone against the orthodoxy, but deep down, she was still the domineering commander of the federal regency. On the surface, she and the people around her were the same kind of people, but their essence was completely different. She had never felt that bloodline inheritance was very important. After all, reproduction had been replaced by machines, and continuing life had become extremely simple. As long as she was willing, she could have the inheritor with the best genes. However, this era was different. Bearing children was not only to satisfy the needs of the body, but also to continue life and will. Because Jiang Pingji had no children, when the news of her serious illness spread, everyone unanimously thought that the foundation she had built would be destroyed. Without children there was no hope of continuing. Even if no one said it in front of her, she understood in her heart. Once she died, the people who had once attached themselves to her would be like rootless duckweed. When the tree falls, the monkeys scatter and they would be divided up by other forces in this chaotic world. This time she was pretending to be sick so everyone could still face her calmly. Next time, if she was really seriously injured or critically ill, what would happen? Calculating the average lifespan of this era, the people around her were already middle-aged or old. They could not be frightened when they were old. So, she had to restrain herself a little and protect herself so that these little princesses would not be frightened to death. The power of dozens of ballistae was indeed terrifying. The live stream could not help but feel worried as it watched the soldiers continuously die under the ballistae. However, this was a war of 100,000 people. No matter how powerful dozens of ballistae were, there was no way to wipe out the other side. After a few dozen breaths, the vanguard troops of the two sides had already clashed together. On the battlefield, unless one reached Jiang Pingji's level, pure combat techniques would not be of much use. Teamwork was far more important than individual recklessness, and their survival rate was higher. Yang Si ordered his troops to put up a battle formation that was loose on the outside but tight on the inside, in order to mislead Yuan Xian. He wanted Yuan Xian to mistakenly think that they were fighting in a hurry and their battle formation was unstable, making them easy to defeat. Yuan Xian was indeed thinking this way. He was so pleased with himself that he lost some of his caution in commanding the battle. If a general was less cautious and dependable, it could be directly reflected on the battlefield. The performance of the soldiers was the most obvious. Nie Sun looked at the situation coldly. As if he had noticed something, his pale lips pursed tightly. Something was not right. The enemy's formation seemed to be loose, messy, and disorderly, but when the two armies clashed, the performance of the two armies was completely different. The troops under Yuan Xian's tent were extremely excited and the originally tight formation began to show signs of loosening. On the other hand, the enemy's troops did not disperse when they charged, and the confrontation between the two armies was not messy either. It was obviously premeditated. Nie Sun watched for a while. His heart was beating like a drum, and an inexplicable panic struck his chest, making him palpitate uncomfortably. Quickly report to General Yuan Xian that the enemy is deceiving us. We must not be impulsive and reckless. Nie Sun asked the soldier to pass the message, but Yuan Xian did not take his words to heart at all. What right did a scholar, who only knew how to talk empty words, have to give orders on the battlefield? A strategist's responsibility was to come up with strategies. The main battlefield was the general's home ground. Nie Sun should not be a noisy guest and usurp the host. Tell military advisor Nie that I know what I'm doing. There's no need for him to worry too much. Just wait for the celebration banquet tonight. Yuan Xian responded casually. Moreover, how can a military order be changed so easily? The situation on the battlefield is ever-changing and opportunities are fleeting. I can't listen to him completely. If Feng Jin had not secretly tricked Nie Sun and caused all of Nie Sun's schemes to fail, Yuan Xian's trust in him would not have fallen to rock bottom. When Nie Sun heard the soldier's reply, his chest thumped harder and harder. The frequency was also frighteningly high. However, Yuan Xian was the main general. Although Nie Sun had military power, he could not keep Yuan Xian in check. Yuan Xian was unwilling to listen, and he could not press his head to make him obey. Obstinate and self-opinionated. Nie Sun was so angry that the veins on his forehead were bulging. He gritted his teeth and said, "Such a boorish man will not have a good end." His voice was very soft. The surrounding shouts were like thunder, but no one heard him. Jiang Pingji pointed at the battlefield and said, "Jing Rong, look at them. Don't they look like black sesame porridge?" Yang Si was speechless. What porridge? His lord paid attention to the situation on the battlefield and gave orders. The messengers who received orders and waved the battle flags and the soldiers who beat the drums also changed the rhythm of the drums. The generals and soldiers who were fighting at the front heard the movement and understood it. On one hand they let the enemy rush in and on the other they closed the gap in the front line. Others closed the door to beat the dogs but Jiang Pingji closed the door to kill. She smiled and said, "Our soldiers' battle formation is tight, like a thick black sesame porridge that cannot be poured out." The enemy's formation seemed to be strict, but they had overexerted themselves and were eager for quick success. After several exchanges of attacks, the formation has become more and more loose, which is just the right time to thin them out. Encircle them and break them one by one. Yang Si glanced at the battlefield. From time to time, blood would soar into the sky, heads would fly everywhere, and the ground would be covered with broken limbs and bones. He said in a pleading tone, "My lord, can we change the analogy?" Yang Si also liked to drink black sesame porridge. The doctor said that drinking more black sesame could slow down aging and reduce white hair. However, his lord seemed to be going against him. She deliberately used black sesame porridge as a metaphor for the dense mass of heads on the battlefield, which made Yang Si lose all his appetite. Jiang Pingji asked, "Not my image?" Yang Si's face was cold. "The image is perfect." It successfully made Yang Si feel disgusted with the black sesame porridge. He felt that in the future, whenever he saw the black sesame porridge, he would subconsciously think of the human heads crowding around it. Although the metaphor was a little disgusting, Jiang Pingji was right. What effect would individual heroism have on a battlefield of 100,000 soldiers? Like a drop of water flowing into the ocean. Only their tacit cooperation and imposing manner could allow them to win this battle. Combine. Jiang Pingji gave another order. Attack. The messenger who passed the order made a signal, and the rhythm of the war drums changed again. It was as rapid as a rainstorm. The shield soldiers at the front line tightened their defensive line according to the order. While they killed the enemy, they combined their shields into 2 rows, which were at least 10 feet tall. Chapter 1267. The troops under Jiang Pingji's tent became a meat grinder. They first divided the enemy into countless smaller pieces, then contracted the battle line to mince them into pieces. The quality of Yuan Xian's troops was far inferior to the elite troops trained by Jiang Pingji for many years. The difference between the two sides did not lie in their individual physique, but in the speed and extent of their execution of military orders. Yang Si ordered them to assume a battle formation that was loose on the outside but tight on the inside. They could obediently do as they were told, luring the enemy to let down their guard and send the army to charge. When the two armies charged at the same time, Jiang Pingji's troops could still take care of their comrades in formation, but Yuan Xian's troops paled in comparison. When the two armies clashed, the difference between the two would be magnified again and again. Just like Jiang Pingji's metaphor, on one side was thick porridge that could not be poured down by chopsticks, sticky and solidified, while on the other side was thin porridge with a high moisture content. When thick porridge and thin porridge collided, the thin porridge would naturally be the first to scatter. Jiang Pingji ordered the frontline troops to let the enemy rush into their formation, so they could faithfully execute military orders. When the time was ripe, Jiang Pingji ordered the frontline troops to tighten their defense line, and they also obeyed the order. Strong execution would bring about extremely high efficiency. The battlefield was a place that was ever-changing. Being one step ahead of the enemy meant gaining the upper hand. Jiang Pingji led Yuan Xian and the others by their noses, so they had no choice but to follow her rhythm until they were utterly defeated. In this wave, Jiang Pingji had at least encircled the 5,000 troops under Yuan Xian's command into her territory. Attack. The 5,000 troops were just a small group of people to Jiang Pingji's 50,000 troops. When they were scattered into their formation, they were like a grain of sand mixed into the desert, small and helpless. Coincidentally, at this moment, Jiang Pingji gave the order to encircle and kill. The generals and soldiers who were beating the drums shouted in unison. Snow-white blades and spearheads pierced through from all directions, directly turning the scattered enemy troops into bloody hedgehogs. The rhythm of the generals and soldiers who were beating the drums slowed down, but the strength of the drums did not decrease. Hundreds of drums were played in unison, and the sound resounded throughout the entire battlefield. The momentum alone suppressed the opposite side. The battlefield changed so quickly that it only took a few dozen breaths from beginning to end. Yuan Xian discovered Jiang Pingji's intention to encroach on the enemy. He immediately ordered the soldiers to fight and retreat while defending against the enemy. Unfortunately, their execution was not good enough. When Yuan Xian's order was given, before the soldiers could react, they were surrounded by the enemy. Making dumplings in one go would leave thousands of corpses on the ground. It was almost impossible for these people to survive. Not to mention surviving, being able to leave an intact corpse in the chaotic battle was already a stroke of luck. The gravel and stones on the ground were dyed dark red by the blood. The blood, which looked like little red snakes, gathered on the ground and formed small puddles. Seeing this, Yuan Xian angrily punched the horse's back, causing it to let out a mournful neigh. His eyes were red, and he pulled the reins tightly with one hand, forcing the warhorse to calm down. General Yuanxin, it's obvious that the enemy has come prepared. Why don't we retreat first to preserve our military strength? The two armies had only clashed for a quarter of an hour, but they had already lost thousands of soldiers and horses. Their morale had plummeted, while the enemy's losses were minimal. Continuing to fight like this would only increase the number of casualties. If Yuan Xian had been more cautious and conservative in the beginning, he might not have faced such a difficult situation. Hearing Ye Sun's words, Yuan Xian's eyes turned bloodshot and murderous, causing Ye Sun's heart to tremble. The army hasn't been defeated, and the soldiers still have their combat strength. Military counselor's words shake the morale of the army. Isn't this killing intent? Yuan Xian lowered his head and glanced at the sword in his hand. He almost couldn't suppress the wild and wanton murderous intent in his heart. Ye Sun said, although the enemy has many men and horses, they have very little military supplies and rations. An army of 50,000 will consume countless rations in 3 to 5 days, not to mention 1 or 2 months. Our army doesn't need to face them head-on. We only need to surround and harass them to break their evil plan of using war to sustain war. Ye Sun's method was naturally vicious. If he used it to deal with Jiang Pingji, she would really fall. In order not to delay their speed and mobility, the army's rations could only last for 3 to 5 days. If Ye Sun used rogue tactics to harass her and plunder her rations, Jiang Pingji's side couldn't afford to drag it out. Just as Ye Sun predicted, Jiang Pingji wasn't afraid of a head-on confrontation. She was afraid of the enemy's endless harassment and encirclement. Yuan Xian refused to listen. He was an extremely arrogant and self-opinionated person. He had developed a prejudice against Ye Sun, and this prejudice would always exist. It wouldn't disappear with time. Ye Sun jumped out to stop him at this moment. Yuan Xian was furious. A white light streaked across the sky. Ye Sun was blinded by the light. He subconsciously raised his hand and turned his body to avoid the blade that was aimed at his neck. However, the blade still fell on his shoulder and chest. Intense pain spread from his body to his entire body. It was so painful that his muscles twitched and trembled. Ye Sun's world was instantly dyed with blood. The blood that gushed out from his wound spilled a long trail on the ground. A few deputy generals witnessed everything. They were so shocked that their limbs turned cold. They watched Ye Sun's body go limp and fall to the ground. The fresh blood converged into a pool of blood on the ground beneath him. After everyone saw it, they felt as if they had fallen into an ice cellar. Yuan Xian was actually so arrogant? Ye Sun was Huang Song's strategist. No matter what mistakes he made, he should be dealt with by Huang Song. What right did Yuan Xian have to wield his sword against Ye Sun? Was he so fearless just because he was the elder of the Lord's clan? Drag him away. This person shakes the morale of the army. He has evil intentions. Kill him as a warning to others. After the impulse, Yuan Xian felt a trace of regret in his heart. However, it was quickly drowned out by anger. Yuan Xian's words lacked confidence. However, there was no turning back. Since he had already been slashed, how could he apologize? The deputy general stepped forward and said, General, strategist Nye is the Lord's trusted aide. If you kill him before the battle, it will not be good for you. It seemed like he was speaking for Yuan Xian, but he was actually pleading for Ye Sun. Although the wound was deep, it was not fatal. If the bleeding was stopped in time, he could still keep his life. Yuan Xian valued himself more. If Ye Sun really died, it would indeed be troublesome. His tone softened a little. Drag him away and keep an eye on him. The deputy general was afraid that he would go back on his word. He quickly said, Yes, sir. Ye Sun's wound was very long and deep. The bleeding was also very impressive. It had only been a short while, but his clothes were already soaked. The soldier who was supporting him raised his hand and wiped the warm blood on his hand. Ye Sun's face was very fair. Even though he had grown a short beard to make himself look more mature, it still could not hide his gentleness. Because he had lost too much blood, his originally fair complexion had turned pale. His lips had also darkened. Faced with such a large wound and loss of blood, the military doctor was also in a difficult position. In the end, he could only take a risk out of desperation. I heard that the military doctors under Lu Shi's tent are very good at suturing wounds. Why don't we try using this to stop the bleeding? When Huang Song and Su Bei formed an alliance, they ambushed Hu County, which was guarded by Qiguan Rang, and stole a cart of medical supplies. With this cart of supplies and the retired military doctors he had secretly bribed, Huang Song's side also copied Jiang Pingji's logistical medical methods. However, Huang Song's side lacked experience and did not learn well. In the end, there were not many military doctors who knew how to suture. Nie Sun's wound was so large that he would die if he did not suture it. It was better to treat a dead horse as a living one. With the help of hemostatic powder, he might be able to keep his life. Chapter 1268. From afar, Jiang Pingji could not see what was happening at the enemy's rear. She did not know that Nie Sun was struggling between life and death. Nie Sun was struggling for his life at the back, and the soldiers at the front were also fighting with their lives on the line. At every moment there were people dying in foreign lands. Vigor was something that could only be built up in one go, then weakened by the second and exhausted by the third. Once it went downhill, it would be very difficult for it to rise again. Jiang Pingji had tricked Yuan Xn the moment they met face to face. She had defeated 5,000 of his troops and horses. She had slapped down their morale. She tightened her grip on the hilt of the god-slaying saber, like a person who was addicted to smoking, trying her best to resist the urge to leave the scene. Yang Si, who was on the side, saw that she was trying hard to endure. Her pitiful appearance made him unable to harden his heart. He was full of persuasion, but he only sighed. "If you don't mind, why don't you let Si do it for you? Look, it's rare to see such an understanding strategist like him. He's so considerate of the Lord. Bullying such a cute little angel, doesn't the Lord's conscience hurt?" Jiang Pingji's eyes lit up. She wanted to grab Yang Xixiang and bite her. This guy was too good. Yang Si. He didn't dare to let the Lord take a whiff. Firstly, being kissed by the Lord made him feel like being kissed by a man. Secondly, he was afraid that the Lord would calm down and take revenge. Thirdly, he was afraid that if this matter were to spread to Wei Si's ears, it would provoke the revenge of the jealous beauty. He couldn't afford to provoke him. Jiang Pingji tightened her grip on Little White's reins. Little White seemed to understand Jiang Pingji's intentions, and its fighting spirit was high. "Go, Little White." Jiang Pingji tightened her grip on the reins and clamped the horse's belly. Little White swiftly ran from the army's flank to the front line. Before Yang Si could say anything, he saw Little White kicking up a cloud of dust along the way. One person and one horse had already left. "So, I'm destined to have gray hair when I meet such a master. I should drink more black sesame porridge." Because the scales of victory and defeat on the battlefield had tilted in their favor, and the situation of the battle was becoming more and more favorable, Yang Si allowed Jiang Pingji to have a go. "Fairy Queen Scarlet. Ren Gallop, get on the horse. Husky attack. Sankei, you guys are so evil. Can't you let me watch the live stream? Under your violent brainwashing, my mind is now filled with images of a husky riding on Little White, swinging the god-slaying sword and killing people. The host is so handsome and charming. Magical things were more memorable than serious things." When many idle audiences thought of Jiang Pingji, the first thing that came to their minds was not her beautiful face and careless smile, but a husky in red and silver armor with its tongue hanging out. Fortunately, Jiang Pingji had blocked the bullet screen in the streaming room. If she accidentally saw the bullet screen, she would definitely perform poorly. Yang Si's commanding style was different from Jiang Pingji's. The latter used overt schemes while the former liked to backstab people. Sinister and crafty, always giving people the illusion of being entangled by a cold and venomous snake. Jiang Nongqin, who was killing the enemies at the front line, was the first to realize that the commander had changed. As expected, the person in charge now should be Yang Si, right? This is so uncomfortable, Jiang Nongqin had learned from Jiang Pingji. She also liked the style of fighting in a big way. If it was Yang Si, she would always feel uncomfortable all over. Only by killing a few more enemies could she feel better. Jiang Nongqin shook off the fresh blood on the blade. Her face was filled with sternness. "Where's the Lord?" Jiang Nongqin urged her horse to retreat to the rear. She turned her head to look for Jiang Pingji, but she did not see the familiar figure. Of course, she could not see it because Jiang Pingji was too far away from her. She really can't withstand a single blow. Jiang Pingji felt the blood in her whole body boiling. The horrifying blood in the eyes of the audience was a drug that stimulated her nerves. She galloped along the way, killed people along the way, and left the corpses of the enemies behind. City of Illusion. Kill one person in 10 steps, leave no trace for 1,000 miles. But the streamer killed 10 people in 1 step and they all died with grievances. The former was the unrestrained heroism of a swordsman, while the latter was the blood debt of a butcher. They could not accuse Jiang Pingji of being ruthless. Similarly, they could not say that the death of the enemy soldiers served them right. Who was the murderer? This was the way of the world. The idle fish who were watching the show entertained themselves, while some of the more reserved ones turned around leisurely and continued to watch from the sidelines. Jiang Pingji's gaze seemed to penetrate the heavy wall of people and see the general of the enemy. To shoot a person, first shoot the horse. To capture the bandits, first capture the king. If she could take the head of the enemy general from among the tens of thousands of troops, Jiang Pingji was tempted, but before she could put it into action, she unhappily put down this tempting challenge. Forget it. A group of middle-aged and old princesses was more important. Even so, Jiang Pingji still killed whoever stood in her way. Under the god-slaying sword there would be no complete corpse. Jiang Pingji's side was like a hot knife through butter. Yuan Xian's side became more and more dispirited as the battle went on. Their morale dropped to a certain level, and the soldiers did not have the courage to continue fighting. Yuan Xian saw that the battle situation could not be salvaged. In the end, he could only spit angrily and unwillingly order a retreat. He thought that this group of enemies would be easy to take down. Who knew that after taking 2 bites, he realized that they were not bones made of meat, but bones made of steel. If he really bit down, he was sure that his teeth would break. Jiang Pingji chased after them for a while and won the award of the best player in the match. In the end, she unwillingly brought her men back. She knew very well that the disadvantage of the army was too obvious. Not to mention chasing after the enemy, they could not even delay them for a long time. Pack up the supplies they left behind. Reward the army well and take care of the wounded. The soldiers have worked hard today. Jiang Pingji raised her hand to wipe the blood off her face. She casually tore off a piece of clothing from a corpse and wiped the body of the god-slaying sword carelessly. Yang Si also said, "My lord, let's rest for a day and leave this place tomorrow. Yuan Xian suffered a great loss today. He will certainly not let it go." Yuan Xian was fighting on his home ground, so the logistics and food supply line could be guaranteed. However, this was not the case for Jiang Pingji's side. She could only use the battle to sustain the battle. If it was 3,000 to 5,000 soldiers and horses, it would naturally not be strenuous, but the pressure of 50,000 soldiers and horses was too great. They even had to count their food and did not dare to act recklessly. Jiang Pingji said, "I think so too. I'm not afraid of anything else, but I'm afraid that Nye Sun will give Yuan Xian the idea of strengthening the defense and clearing the field." What was strengthening the defense and clearing the field? Naturally, it was not laying out a carpet as the salted fish said. This was a method that was specially used to deal with the invasion of a strong enemy and to sustain the battle through the battle. Fortifying the defense and clearing the field would make the enemy unable to attack the stronghold and seize the supplies and food. Jiang Pingji did not need to attack the city now, but she wanted to seize the supplies and supplies. If Yuan Xian listened to Nye Sun's advice and decided to strengthen the defense and clear the field, Jiang Pingji and the others would have to starve. Once the 50,000 soldiers ran out of food, they would not be able to hold on for 10 to 15 days, but 4 to 5 days. The worst-case scenario would be to kill the war horses to fill their stomachs. Speaking of this, Jiang Pingji reminded him, "Also, get someone to count the enemy's war horses. Continue using the ones that can be used. Slaughter the ones that can't be used and add a plate of meat." Yang Si said, "What about the corpses of the fallen soldiers?" Jiang Pingji rolled her eyes at him. "You still want to eat people?" Yang Si was speechless. "Who the F***ck wants to eat people?" Jiang Pingji said, "Burn the corpses of our soldiers and place them in an urn with their clothes and bring them back. The enemy's corpses will be directly burned by the river." After many wars, in order to make it easier to clean up the battlefield, the corpses were directly thrown into the river. In the most tragic cases, the lower part of the river could even be blocked and the whole river would be dyed bright red. If doing so saved trouble, Jiang Pingji did not mind doing so. However, she was very clear that the rotting corpses would contaminate the river and even cause a large-scale epidemic to break out in the villages near the river. Chapter 1269. Get out! Yuan Xian suffered such a big loss in Jiang Pingji's hands and lost tens of thousands of troops. How could he not be angry? He couldn't control his stubbornness. He urgently needed a way to vent his anger. Destroying the main tent was the only choice. The deputy generals in the tent didn't dare to go against Yuan Xian. He even killed Huang Song's confidant, Nye Sun, without hesitation, not to mention the others. The deputy generals exchanged glances with each other and retreated resentfully. They didn't want to be swept by the tail of the storm. Everyone filed out. Looking at the empty commander's tent, Yuan Xan panted heavily, his eyes bloodshot. Yuan Xan couldn't escape the blame for this defeat, but he didn't want to admit it or accept it was his fault. Victory and defeat were common in war. He would definitely kill the enemy next time. He was depressed and drank the whole night until he was dead drunk. At the same time, Nye Sun, who had experienced a life and death struggle, finally opened his sleepy and confused eyes. The military counselor is awake? The military counselor is really awake. The military doctor who was taking care of him noticed that Nye Sun's eyelashes were trembling. He was excited. This was a sign that he was about to wake up. If he didn't wake up, the military doctor who was in charge of stitching up the wound would be in despair. He was afraid of being responsible for Nye Sun's death. Now, not only did Nye Sun not die, but he also woke up successfully. Not only did he not make a mistake, but he also made a contribution. The road to Qingyun was right under his feet. Military counselor, do you feel uncomfortable now? Are you hungry? Are you thirsty? Do you want some porridge to fill your stomach? The military doctor was moved to tears. Nye Sun was definitely the most stressed patient he had taken over. He was unconscious for 3 days and 3 nights. During this period he had a high fever and his wound was red and festering. They all thought that Nye Sun couldn't make it through this and wanted to prepare for his funeral. They didn't expect Nye Sun to have such a strong desire to live despite looking weak. He managed to make it through the most dangerous stage. Nye Sun's face was pale. His lips were cracked due to the lack of moisture. His eyes were dazed and unfocused as if he hadn't regained his consciousness. The military doctor could only suppress his excitement. He looked at Nye Sun's mouth eagerly, expecting him to say something. If Nye Sun's mind was clear, it meant that he was temporarily out of danger. If his mind was still muddled, it meant that he was still in danger. The military doctor tried to call out a few more times, and Nye Sun finally gave him a little reaction, his eyeballs turning in his direction. Nye Sun felt like he had just had a terrible nightmare. He groped his way forward in the dark, and there was something that he couldn't see clearly chasing after him. He didn't know what it was, but he had a faint premonition that it was extremely dangerous and couldn't be caught. He could only keep running forward, but the footsteps behind him were getting closer and closer. Just as he was about to lose all hope, he heard a cry coming from afar as if it was guiding him. The girl's cries were indistinct at first, and then, that was the cry of a baby girl. She cried for a very long time, and from time to time she would even break into sobs. Nye Sun's heart ached for no reason. Ignoring the thing chasing after him, he ran toward the source of the baby girl's cry. If there really was a child in this dark place, how desperate would it be? Nye Sun didn't know what he was thinking at that time, but he followed that direction as if he was possessed. He didn't know how long he had been walking, but a dazzling white light suddenly bloomed in front of him, and the surrounding darkness was completely dispelled. At the end of the light stood a graceful woman. She was wearing a peach-pink dress and a red blouse over her head. She was coaxing something with her head lowered. Nye Sun focused his eyes and realized that there was an infant in the woman's arms. The woman also noticed his existence and turned around to call out to him. Qingyun? Qingyun? Nye Sun was shocked and his eyes suddenly widened. Memories flooded into his mind like a tide, and he was forcibly awakened by the pain. When he woke up, Nye Sun was muddle-headed and didn't know where he was. It wasn't until the dazzling candlelight made his eyes water that he gradually came back to his senses. Military counselor? Military counselor? The military doctor was still calling out persistently. If he wasn't afraid of offending Nye Sun, he really wanted to call out his full name. It was said that calling out like this could bring back the soul of a lost person. Nye Sun forcefully blinked his sore and watery eyes, and opened his mouth with difficulty. Water, water? He had been unconscious for 3 days and 3 nights. Other than the medicine that the military doctor had forced into his stomach, there were only 2 small bowls of porridge. He was thirsty and hungry. The military doctor hurriedly asked someone to bring warm water and carefully fed Nye Sun half a bowl. However, Nye Sun's body was weak and it was difficult for him to swallow. Most of the water was wasted. After drinking the water, Nye Sun couldn't resist the exhaustion of his body and fell into a deep sleep again. When he woke up for the second time, it was already 6 hours later. Nye Sun was much more clear-headed. He asked for half a bowl of porridge from the soldier who was taking care of him, and his cold limbs were slowly filled with a warm itch. When he regained consciousness, Nye Sun lay motionless on the simple bed, staring at the top of the tent. At this moment, a deputy general ran over to look at Nye Sun out of guilt. Nye Sun had already gathered some strength. He asked the deputy general, How's the battle situation? Before he fell unconscious from his heavy injuries, the battle situation was already extremely disadvantageous. If Yuan Xian could retreat in time, the losses wouldn't be too great. The deputy general's expression was solemn as he stammered, "Our army suffered a great defeat. We lost more than 11,000 soldiers and lost 30% of our supplies." When Ye Sun heard this, he closed his eyes calmly. The deputy general said, military advisor, this general has a bold idea. Why don't military advisors secretly send a letter to the Lord and quietly dismiss General Yuan Xian? General Yuan Xian is not worthy of being a general. We can't just let go of the military advisors suffering this time. Ye Sun closed his eyes and thought for a long time, so long that the deputy general thought he had fainted again. Changing generals at the last minute is a taboo for military strategists. Ye Sun said indifferently, "Moreover, I'm afraid I won't be able to live for long." The deputy general was shocked and looked at the military doctor in disbelief. The military doctor nodded his head awkwardly. He said, "The military advisor's wounds are too deep. Although the vital organs weren't injured, he has lost too much blood and the wounds are red and festering. If he wants to completely get out of danger, it will depend on his recovery in the next half a month. If he's not careful, he'll..." Ye Sun had survived the most difficult hurdle, but this didn't mean that his life was safe. There was a lack of supplies during the march and the environment for recuperation was not peaceful. All these factors were disadvantageous to Ye Sun. Before the wounds completely healed, they couldn't let their guard down. If the wounds suddenly reopened or bad luck invaded, Ye Sun's life would be lost here. According to the military doctor's many years of experience as a doctor, the chances of Ye Sun surviving were less than 5%. The deputy general frowned in distress. After a while he sighed angrily. He wanted to drag Yuan Xian out and whip him. Without Ye Sun to handle military affairs, the army was in chaos. Yuan Xian was a boorish man who only knew how to train and fight. What was this? Chapter 1270. The deputy general's heart ached when he heard this. Their military advisor was too kind-hearted. If only he had secretly killed Yuan Xian, that boorish fellow, long ago. Ye Sun said, "I still have something on my mind." The deputy general said, "Military counselor, please say it." Ye Sun said, "Do you know how to read?" The deputy general said, "I only know a few words. I don't dare to show off in front of the military counselor." Ye Sun's breathing quickened and his eyes became more and more tired. He forced himself to say, "Help me prepare a brush and ink and write a letter to my wife and daughter. Yuan Xian is narrow-minded and holds grudges. If I'm gone, there will only be an orphan and a widow left at home. I'm afraid they will be bullied. Even if the Lord takes pity on them and is willing to take care of them, there are many troubles at the widow's door. He can't take care of them forever. Although the Lord will take care of the widow of his subjects, it can't be compared to blood relatives." Ye Sun said desolately, "Are you willing to write a letter for me? I want my wife to bring my daughter to the Yu family. The Yu family is a famous family in Dongqing and they only have one daughter. If my wife has two elders to take care of her, I can die in peace." The deputy general said, "I'm willing." Ye Sun revealed a light smile of relief. "Thank you." The deputy general looked at him and the 7-foot-tall man couldn't help but be envious. He asked someone to prepare a blank scroll and brush. Ye Sun couldn't take it anymore and fell into a deep sleep. He woke him up an hour later. Ye Sun dictated and the deputy general wrote. "I have a private seal in my bosom. My wife will know the authenticity of the letter by stamping it." The private seal was like an identity card to the people of this era. It was unique and recognizable. Ye Sun had a few seals. Some were used for official business and some were used for personal relationships. Only the one in his bosom was carved by him and his wife, Zhu Qingning. One was written in yin and the other in yang. Each had a mandarin duck and the nickname they gave each other. This kind of private item would usually not be exposed in front of others. The deputy general took out the private seal and carefully stamped it at the end of the scroll. Seeing the private seal, the deputy general was secretly shocked at the relationship between Ye Sun and his wife. Ye Sun had used up all his energy and he had a low fever. He couldn't resist the drowsiness and fell asleep again. The army couldn't privately send documents to the outside world. Otherwise they would be suspected of betrayal. They had to go through the official channels. Ye Sun used to handle this kind of thing, but now he was about to kneel, so the letter naturally fell into Yuan Xian's hands. The letter was very normal and short. Ye Sun told his wife that if anything happened to him, there was no need for her to wait for him. She could just marry herself. Because his situation was not very good, he was worried that his wife and daughter would not have anyone to take care of them, so he hoped that they would go to the Yu clan. Nyesun's family? Who is Nyesun's family? Yuan Xen stared at the letter and thought for a while. He finally remembered that Nyesun's in-laws were Master Yuan Jing, a famous scholar in Dongqing. To do Xen, Yuan said. Yuan's words. Although Master Yuan Jing had not publicly surrendered to Jiang Pingji, everyone knew that Master Yuan Jing had been a teacher in Wanzhou for many years. Even though he didn't surrender to Jiang Pingji, everyone knows he's been a teacher in Wanzhou for many years. If Zhu Qingning takes his daughter to the Yu family, won't he be going to Jiang Pingji? Moreover, if Nyesun really died, would his master mistreat this orphan and widow? Was there a need for them to seek shelter from the Yu clan? However, Nyesun's request was reasonable, and he was heavily injured by Yuan Xan, so Yuan Xan couldn't reject him directly, in case he was criticized for being heartless. Yuan Xan asked the deputy general, "How is the counselor's condition?" Nyesun is still lying in the gates of hell. Yuan Xan didn't believe him. He called the military doctor over. The military doctor explained in detail, but the content was similar. Yuan Xan didn't believe it, so he called the military doctor over. The military doctor explained in detail, but the content was more or less the same. Yuan Xan didn't believe him. He called the military doctor over. The military doctor told him in detail, but the content was similar. First of all, this letter could not pass through the hands of the Lord, Huang Song. Otherwise, the Lord would know that he was the one who injured Nyesun in front of the battle and would definitely remove him from his position and capture him. Next, Nyesun was about to die. His survival rate was very low. Yuan Xan couldn't keep his will. After thinking about it, Yuan Xan still approved the letter. Send a horse to deliver the letter to the wife of the military counselor. Nyesun's wife, Zhu Qingning, was in Heda County in Haozhou. Heda County was not far from here. It would take 5 or 6 days to get there. Nyesun's condition had been worsening. He didn't wake up for long. Sometimes he was delirious from the fever. Yuan Xan also sneaked a peek. Nyesun's original appearance was stunning. The cinnabar between his eyebrows enhanced his looks. 90% of the women in the world would be ashamed of their looks. Only Wei Ci could compete with Nyesun in this aspect. Her appearance was leisurely and unparalleled. She would be too long if she was a bit more and too short if she was a bit less. Her eyebrows were like green feathers and her skin was as white as snow. Now his skin was dark yellow and he looked haggard. His body was thinner and he looked like a bag of bones. His breathing was weak and intermittent. It was as if a soul reaper was crouching beside him, waiting for him to die. At the thought of this, Yuan Xan felt the temperature in the tent turn cold. He left after saying, "Take care of the military counselor." Seeing this, the military doctor let out a long sigh. After Yuan Xan left and the military doctor went out to get medicine, Nyesun opened his eyes weakly. There was an unfathomable depth in his eyes. Heh! The corners of his mouth curled up into a mysterious smile. Zhu Qingning had been feeling anxious for a while. Her daughter cried for the whole night. Her face was red and she was crying so hard that she was almost out of breath. She had no choice but to seek medical advice. She even invited a few mistresses who helped exorcise evil spirits to come to the mansion to check the feng shui. The mistress couldn't figure out the reason and could only say vaguely, "There's chaos outside. There are countless resentful spirits. The little lady is still young. She hasn't formed her skull yet. Her soul is easily infected by evil spirits. She might have bumped into something. Why don't you let me cast a spell and try?" Zhu Qingning didn't believe this at first. But her daughter had been crying for a few days. She couldn't figure out the reason and could only believe the mistress. After the spell, the mistress gave Zhu Qingning a few yellow talismans that could cure children's crying at night. After Zhu Qingning put them on the child, she hung them around her daughter's room. Unexpectedly, the yellow talismans were really effective. That night, the crying quieted down. Her daughter cried for a while before she was coaxed to sleep. Zhu Qingning immediately prepared a lot of gold and silver for this mistress. Although this mistress wasn't a swindler, she wasn't that magical either. She wasn't sure herself and was prepared to run away. Unexpectedly, Zhu Qingning sent someone to give her a generous reward the next day. The mistress was so happy that she could see her teeth but not her eyes. She simply took all the credit. A few days later, a letter from home from the front lines was delivered to the mansion. After reading it, Zhu Qingning's face turned pale and she burst into tears. After crying, she regained her senses and immediately sent people to pack up their belongings and important items. She also prepared enough guards and horses to go north. Because Lady Qi wasn't in Heda County, no one stopped Zhu Qingning's big move. More than 100 guards escorted the mother and daughter and a lot of their belongings north. As long as they avoided the front lines, the journey was still very safe. Zhu Qingning grabbed the letter and flipped it over. She vaguely understood the real reason why her daughter had been crying non-stop a few days ago. Chapter 1271. Who did you say was slashed? Jiang Pingji ate and drank the spicy food happily. Although the conditions of the march were harsh, she still tried her best to live a better life. She was just enjoying her food, but she didn't expect Yang Si to reveal such a big news for her. Yang Si didn't frown. He was used to his lord's behavior, which was more boorish than a man's. Sometimes he even forgot her gender. He repeated, "Our informant sent news that Nye Sun was slashed by Yuan Xn. His life is in danger." Jiang Pingji clapped her hands and said with a smile, "They're biting each other. They haven't won the war and they're already fighting among themselves?" Yang Si secretly rolled his eyes. No matter what, Nye Sun was her cousin. She didn't have to gloat so obviously, right? Jiang Pingji coughed and said seriously, "Why was Nye Sun slashed by Yuan Xn? And he almost lost his life?" Yang Si said, "I heard that they had a disagreement before the battle. Yuan Xn flew into a rage out of humiliation and slashed him. According to their understanding, Yuan Xn was a 100% boorish man. He had a lot of experience in war, but he was impatient and arrogant. In Jiang Pingji's opinion, such a guy could only be a vanguard general who charged and broke through enemy lines. He couldn't be a commander who commanded the army. If it were her, she would never let Yuan Xn have any command. Even if she had to do so, she would arrange for people who could suppress Yuan Xn. Obviously, he and Nye Sun had different opinions. Yuan Xn was definitely stupid. If Nye Sun died, he would really die unjustly. Nye Sun wasn't enough to suppress Yuan Xn. Instead, he angered Yuan Xn and was killed. Wasn't that unjustly? Jiang Pingji always said whatever was on her mind. Her straightforward temperament made people love and hate her at the same time. Nye Sun is really pitiful. Yes, such an idiot. As his cousin, I definitely sympathize with him. As his enemy, I feel that I can secretly laugh when I lie in bed at night." Yang Si was speechless. He looked around and found that there was indeed no one around. Then he breathed a sigh of relief. Yang Si didn't want this idle conversation to be written into unofficial history. If Nye Sun saw it, he would be so angry that he would die. Most importantly, it was very embarrassing. Nye Sun's life and death are unknown. This is indeed beneficial to our army. Yang Si stroked his beard and said, "Yuan Xn is nothing to worry about." Jiang Pingji smiled and said, "I didn't treat this person as an opponent. He lowered my status." Yang Si was puzzled. What do you mean by acting cool? His lord always had amazing words and strange words. Yang Si liked to listen to them and always felt that they were fresh and interesting. Jiang Pingji said, "The so-called pretentiousness is the ability to show off." Yang Si was confused again. What's posturing? Jiang Pingji smiled and said, "You pretend to be very powerful and let others think that you are powerful. In fact, it means very powerful." The viewers in the live stream also giggled as they provided detailed explanations. "Jing Jia, Xiao Rongrong, do you see the streamer in front of you? Every time she unleashed her domineering aura, she was acting cool. Capricorn story man, I can't help but complain. The host is really a master of the essence of acting tough." Yang Si's expression twisted for a moment, and he couldn't help but tell the truth. This phrase is quite suitable for the Lord. Jiang Pingji was speechless. The inexplicable feeling of being ridiculed by one's own strategist hit the bullseye under smiley face, angle, under Yue. Xiao Rongrong is really too cute. The power of that ridicule just now should be enough to blow up half of the Japanese pirates' island. Durian Gao, accurate, vivid, and ruthless. You hit the target with one strike. Xiao Rongrong has already seen the threshold of the holy temple of ridicule. Jiang Pingji coughed awkwardly and changed the topic stiffly. The news that Nye Sun is seriously ill and dying has been confirmed. Just Yuan Xn alone isn't scary. We can still continue to stir up trouble. It would be best to stir up the entire Qinzhou and delay the situation at the rear to distract Huang Song at the front line. Yang Si said faintly, "My lord, you still have to be careful. You can't expose your identity." After all, Jiang Pingji was still a patient. Her condition was not much better than Nye Sun's. Although she was reckless, she still had to keep up her disguise. Jiang Pingji pouted uninterestedly. Why did Yang Si always like to make things difficult for her? Yusue Jo? If I don't make things difficult for you, then I'm sorry for the delicacies that were snatched away by the host. Jiang Pingji, whether it was God's will or something else, Yuan Xin, who had lost Nye Sun, was not as stupid as the two of them had expected. The first few days were smooth sailing, but then they encountered obstacles. Jiang Pingji was the first to discover that something was wrong. Yesterday, when she led the troops to sweep through the area, they could get a lot of food, but the food they found today was much less than expected. This should be an important town. Why isn't there much food stored in the warehouse? It seemed that more than half of the food had been moved away overnight. The ones that had not been moved away were probably because there was not enough manpower. Yang Si said, "We'll know once we catch the person in charge and ask him." They caught the person in charge of the granary, but he still refused to answer. They used some methods to extort a confession from him, and he confessed everything. The food stored in the granary in the nearby important town has long been moved away. Jiang Pingji raised her eyebrows and asked, "When did this happen?" The person in charge answered shakily, 3 days ago. Jiang Pingji sneered and played with the whip in her hand. The whip was like a snake with eyes. It whipped the ground from time to time, making a crisp sound. The person in charge was horrified to see that the long whip had left a few deep marks on the green brick ground. Which direction did they go? The person in charge resisted the urge to pee in his lower abdomen. He was drenched in cold sweat as he said, "They went southwest." Jiang Pingji looked at his face coldly for a long time. She raised her hand and waved. 2 strong soldiers came forward and pressed him down. Is it possible that Nye Sun is not critically ill? Yang Si was puzzled. Yuan Xin really doesn't seem like a person with such a brain and reaction speed. Yuan Xin was an old general with rich combat experience, but he was too conceited. To put it bluntly, he was a straightforward person who did not know how to be flexible. To deal with Jiang Pingji's rogue tactic of using war to sustain war, fortifying the defense and clearing the field was the most conservative and the smartest way. It also had the smallest loss. Yuan Xin did not think of this. Instead, he chose to lead the troops to fight Jiang Pingji head-on. In the end, he was beaten by her until he covered his head and fled like a rat. Now he reacted and wanted to cut off her food supply? Jiang Pingji asked, "How many days do we have left of our army's provisions?" Yang Si replied, "The military supplies that Yuan Xin's army left behind previously, plus the harvest from these days, should be able to last for another 10 days. After 10 days, the situation would not be optimistic." Yang Si could not figure out what had happened to Yuan Xin. Was Yuan Xin out of his mind, or was there someone guiding him? If it was the former, there was no need to worry. If it was the latter, they had to find a way to slip away as soon as possible. Jiang Pingji said, "Fight and retreat at the same time. Be prepared for both scenarios." She was not a greedy person. She also knew when to stop. It was important to destroy the enemy, but the soldiers in her army were not cabbages. They could not increase the meaningless consumption. Chapter 1272. Jiang Pingji had many shortcomings, but she also had many advantages. The most obvious one was that she was straightforward and decisive. It was clear that their side had an absolute advantage and they were about to turn the enemy's lair upside down. Under the urge of greed and fluke mentality, most generals would inevitably be indecisive and hesitant. However, Jiang Pingji was not like that. She had always been straightforward about victory and defeat. Because she was too straightforward, sometimes others could not help but wonder if she treated military affairs as a child's play. Of course, Yang Si understood that his lord would not joke about such things. The more it was so, the more terrifying it was because the possibility of tricking her was too low. On the contrary, the probability of being tricked by her was increasing. I don't know if it's fortunate or unfortunate that those feudal lords were born in the same era as my lord. Yang Si sighed in a low voice. Jiang Nongqin accidentally heard him. Of course it's fortunate, she replied with an indifferent expression. Yang Si and Jiang Nongqin were considered friends who had a friendship boat. Even though the boat often capsized because of his lord, he still readily asked, "Why do you think so, Officer Jiang?" "I feel that it's a little unfortunate. No one wants to be born to be hit by others and lose consecutively." Jiang Nongqin's eyeballs moved a little. How many mortals can see a celestial being like my lord? Naturally they have to rejoice. Yang Si was speechless. He was wrong. Jiang Nongqin was his lord's most loyal diehard fan. She was a brainless fan. She was the kind of diehard fan who felt that his lord's posture was cool and neat even when he saw her squatting in the latrine. He was really muddle-headed to expect to hear a more constructive answer from her. He replied sarcastically, "Commandant Jiang, you have a unique view." Jiang Nongqin turned her gaze to him. Her eyes clearly wrote 5 words. "Do I need you to say that?" Yang Si was speechless. After the army rested and reorganized, Jiang Pingji saw a few bullet screens from the audience in the streaming room before they set off. She frowned in her heart. Jing Rong has been quite close to Officer Jiang these days. What? Do you fancy her? Yang Si was about to get on the saddle. When he heard this, he stepped on nothing. Half of his body hung on the back of the horse. His expression seemed to be empty. Qingqing Liuya, streamer, don't ask so bluntly. You scared Xiao Rong Rong. Jiang Pingji had been streaming for a long time. It was almost 10 years since she appeared. How many 12 years does a man have in his life? Many of the audience had watched them grow up, from their tender teenage years to their mature and steady youths, and even to their middle ages. Apart from Jiang Pingji, Jiang Nongqin was the second familiar face who had accompanied them through so many years of streaming. Jiang Pingji could chat with them and get along with them more like friends. However, Jiang Nongqin was different. Many people treated her as their daughter. Just now, an idle spectator suddenly asked Jiang Nongqin how old she was. Everyone counted with their fingers for a long time. They were shocked to find out that the daughter of Yun Yang was about to become an old leftover woman. Although Jiang Pingji was good, he couldn't bring her home at night to warm her bed, sleep and exercise. They hoped that as the Lord, Jiang Pingji would care about Jiang Nongqin's marriage. Hanyan Ningming, it's not that I despise Rong Rong, but he's old and has a messy private life. He's not suitable to be a son-in-law. Lin Mei, Xiao Rong Rong is indeed getting on in years. Her physique can't be compared to when she was young. I'm afraid she doesn't have the strength. Xingyuan Miao Miao. It's okay to be old as long as he's strong and healthy. However, Xiao Rong Rong doesn't seem to have the capital to be proud. Jiang Nongqin was the daughter of the idle spectators Yin Yang. Then her other half was the son-in-law of the idle spectators in the streaming room. There was nothing wrong with this relationship. Jiang Pingji ridiculed them for being incompetent. Which son-in-law could satisfy his 850,000 in-laws? These were only the idle spectators who had grabbed the small bench in the streaming room. The number of in-laws who were not online was even greater. Jiang Pingji watched helplessly as the streaming room raced. She couldn't help but wonder if Yang Si was at his limit. In the past few years, his private life was basically close to Feng Zhen's. However, after relying on her, he slowly cultivated his moral character and character. It was not too much for him to occasionally steal from her. Little did she know, whose fault was it for Yang Si's private life. It was all Jiang Pingji's fault. Yang Si was quite frightened. He kicked his feet and stepped on the stirrups again. He climbed onto the horse's back and sat firmly. Why is my lord suddenly asking this? Yang Si was surprised. He didn't know why his lord would have such an absurd idea. Did he look like the kind of person who liked to court death? It was fine if he looked at his lord during the day, but at night he was hugging a fanatical fan who only had the lord in his heart? If he had a child in the future, would the child call him father or his lord father? Yang Si shuddered just thinking about that scene. Jiang Pingji said calmly, I see that you've been very close to Jiang Shaowei recently. You've had a lot of contact, so I thought you wanted to get married. Yang Si hurriedly shook his head, as if he wanted to disassociate himself from this and prove his innocence. Although Jiang Shaowei was indeed very good. However, Yang Si didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He said, Isn't it because of official business that Si has frequent contact with Jiang Shaowei? Could it be that his lord couldn't accept Wei Si and wanted to be a matchmaker for the people around her to satisfy her craving? Jiang Pingji glanced at Jiang Nongqin, who looked calm and composed as if she heard nothing. She dared to guarantee that with Jiang Nongqin's hearing, she could hear the conversation between the two. It seems that I've misunderstood. Jiang Pingji grabbed the reins and said, Jiang Shaowei's early years were rough. I don't know how much suffering she's gone through to be where she is today. She's delayed her time and has yet to get married. I'm anxious to see her. Do I have to watch her comb her hair in the future? Over the years there were many prisoners of war. There were female soldiers who retired and got married one after another, but Jiang Nongqin was indifferent. Yang Si said, Of course Jiang Shaowei is very good. Marriage is an important matter. I'd rather choose carefully than decide randomly. My lord thinks so highly of Jiang Shaowei, and Jiang Shaowei herself is so outstanding. What kind of man can't she choose? Let's wait for fate. It'll be fine when it's fated. He said these words with a smile. Jiang Pingji also said with a smile, I'm indeed too anxious about this. When the war is over, I'll go to Jinling Pavilion to pick. Many young and handsome men will gather there. When the time comes, I'll find a reason to hold a grand gathering and let her take a look. Yang Si frowned after hearing that. Young and handsome men from Jinling Pavilion? Forgive me for being rude, but men who are still young and unmarried. Was there a second person besides Wei Si the weirdo? If Jiang Nongqin really wanted to find a husband, she could only choose from the younger ones. There was an age difference of more than 1 year. Was she looking for a husband or a son for herself? Jiang Pingji chatted with Yang Si as she rode the horse and marched. What you said makes sense. It's better to find someone who's older and more considerate. Yang Si thought about it and said, My lord, you're right to think that way. It's just that those who are older are either married or widowers. I don't know how many times they've been married. It's not that I look down on them, but they're not worthy of Jiang Shaowei. You should at least find someone who's unmarried and childless, right? Chapter 1273. Yang Si felt very wronged. Only when Jiang Nongqin rode past him on her horse, she smiled and said 4 words. Smart ass. Yang Si, unconvinced, he rode his horse to catch up with Jiang Nongqin and asked, What do you mean, Field Officer Jiang? Did he, Yang Si, look like the kind of person who would have a workplace romance? Why did everyone think that he was interested in Jiang Nongqin because he was close to her? What kind of gaze was that? It was clearly the boat of friendship swaying. Jiang Nongqin said, Although the military counselor and I are involved in official matters, we don't meet frequently. My lord, you have a sharp eye, so you'll naturally notice. Yang Si said helplessly, Can Commandant Jiang leave the lord in 3 sentences? Jiang Nongqin said coldly, No. Yang Si, the boat of friendship had capsized again, and it was all because of the lord. There was no way to continue living like this. This general understands that this is a misunderstanding. My lord was just playing around for a moment. I hope that the military advisor will not take this matter to heart. I'll explain to her later and clear the military counselor's name. Jiang Nongqin smiled. However, Yang Si had an illusion that his whole body was cold. He kept feeling that it was a self-defeating proposition. The tip of his eyebrows drooped, and there was a look of grievance on his face. Explain what? No explanation. Yang Si was indeed interested in Jiang Nongqin. The two of them were not teenagers. There were many things that did not need to be said. Just as Jiang Nongqin said, the two of them had contact with each other for work. However, no matter how much work they had, it was unlikely that they would meet each other every day. After all, one of them was a scholar while the other was a martial artist. She didn't understand at first, but she understood after a while. She wasn't against it and just treated it as love. Yang Si had his own considerations. He did not intend to reveal it in the near future so as not to affect the state of the two. The war was too dangerous. If there was a slight oversight, not only would he pay with his life, but he would also lose the lives of countless soldiers. To be safe, he had to at least wait until the end of the war. He never thought that his lord would play her cards out of the blue and ask him if he was interested in Jiang Nongqin. Yang Si was really frightened. He stubbornly refused to admit it. I'm not young anymore. Jiang Nongqin smiled and asked him, What do you think, military counselor? Yang Si. He felt as if he had been hit in the head with a stick, and his mind was filled with the words not young. Was he really that old? He always felt that he was in the prime of his youth. He sighed. So Si is already at this age. Does Commandant Jiang dislike her now? Jiang Nongqin joked, No, I've always despised it. It's definitely not just today. Yang Si couldn't help but cover his chest. Could they still chat properly? After a while, Yang Si saw that Jiang Nongqin was still keeping pace with him and had no intention of leaving. Looks like Colonel Jiang doesn't despise the old man beside you? The military counselor is naturally a dragon and phoenix among men. The so-called disdain is just a joke, Jiang Nongqin said seriously. However, the world has yet to be settled. How can we be at home? Wait until I help the Lord pacify the world, then we can talk about love affairs. As long as the military counselor can wait, I can naturally wait. Yang Si. Was it too late for him to run to the Lord and admit that he was interested in Jiang Nongqin? He had to wait for the world to be at peace. He felt unwell all over. As expected, he couldn't stop talking about the Lord. Yang Si thought that the conversation was very soft, but he did not know that Jiang Pingji, who was more than 300 feet away from them, heard it clearly. Not only did she hear it clearly, but the guru in the streaming room who could read lips also translated the entire conversation between the two. Then Xiao Hui Tun Dun, Mother Kerr, Yang see this big dog is indeed interested in my daughter. He even pretended to be so serious just now. Goo goo goo, Mother Kerr +1 Yang see this big dog who asked you to take my daughter away. Did you get my permission? Mo yo kwai, I'm so angry that I'm like a pufferfish crying like a dog. Yang see this big dog, Lao Cg Lianming, I just haven't come to the streaming room for 2 days. Why did Yang si take Nongqin away? What kind of operation is this? Jiang Pingji was quite angry at first, but she could not help but laugh when she saw the bullet screen. At first they called her Little Rongrong and Little Cici, but now they all called her Yang Si and Big Dog with their full names. The salted fish in the streaming room were really a group of capricious goblins. The current atmosphere was relaxed and lively. There was no sign of nervousness at all. However, the enemy scouts are so bold? Jiang Pingji frowned. Her alertness was definitely the strongest at that time. She would not miss any scouts within a certain range of them. According to her discovery, the enemy scouts were watching very closely, which was completely different from Yuan Xian's previous style. The enemy is watching very closely. I'm afraid they're going to make a move. After all, it was an army of 50,000. No matter how mobile they were, it was easy to leave traces when they marched. It was not easy to hide their tracks. Yuan Xian had an obvious home advantage. He sent people to watch so closely that Yang Si and the others had to be on guard. We'll deal with soldiers and water with earth. What are you afraid of? Jiang Pingji looked down and said, by the way, Jing Rong arranged for someone to pass the message. Tell Huayu and the others to act according to the situation. Although I don't know what's wrong with Yuan Xian, he can't do anything to me under the suppression of absolute military strength. Yuan Xian could indeed carry out the strategy of strengthening the defense and clearing the field. He could send people to surround Jiang Pingji and forcefully cut off the rice supply for the 50,000 troops. However, he neglected Feng Jin and the others. Feng Jin had led his troops across the gorge early in the morning and stationed them at the ferry. If Jiang Pingji had not ordered them to hold back temporarily, Yuan Xian would have been stabbed in the back. Jiang Pingji was determined to retreat. With Feng Jin's cover, no one could stop her. Did Yuan Xian become smarter after he slashed Nie Sun? Of course not. Nie Sun was still a patient who could not get out of bed. His condition was erratic, sometimes good and sometimes bad. Because of Nie Sun's absence, there was no one to take care of the military logistics. They could only rely on the deputy generals and ordinary officials to take the blame. It was a mess. Helpless, Yuan Xian could only find a temporary worker. Not long after the notice was posted, someone came to apply for the job. Yuan Xian glanced at him and said disdainfully, "You can't do it." The person who came was a man with an unkempt appearance. He was about 35 or 36 years old. His hair was casually tied with a straw rope. He reeked of alcohol. The clothes did not seem to be his. They did not fit him at all. After he put them on, the lapels were still loose. The overly long hem was lifted up and secured at his waist with a tie. This caused the cloth at his waist to pile up loosely. From afar, it looked like a circle of flesh was protruding from his waist. He was wearing gray and black socks with holes in them. The shoelaces of a pair of wooden clogs were broken and tied again. This person's appearance was unkempt, but the style between his eyebrows was somewhat similar to Nie Sun's. Yuan Xian subconsciously felt disgusted. "General, how do you know that I can't do it before you test me?" Yuan Xian sneered and made things difficult for him. "If I say you can't do it, you can't do it." The person said, "What if I can beat you with strength?" Yuan Xian said disdainfully, "Beat me? You?" "Yes, I think I have some ability. However, I have the final say on how to compete." "A mere unkempt scholar dares to speak to me like this?" Yuan Xian said conceitedly. "Good. How do you want to compete?" The person said, "General's body is as tall and sturdy as a mountain, but I can make you unable to stand up with one hand." In the end, he won with one hand. Chapter 1274. Yuan Xian had lost without even realizing it. He had no choice but to hire this temporary worker. "What's your name? Where are you from? Do you have anyone in your family?" Although he was only a temporary worker, he was considered half an official member. He had to find out more about his background. The person's accent did not sound like he was from Dongqing. It sounded like he was from a land of water and rice. His tone was inexplicably gentle. It was easy to think that he was a gentle and good-tempered gentleman. However, Yuan Xian did not believe that he was a gentleman. Based on his observation, this scholar had killed more than one person. The person cupped his hands and said, I'm Hua Yuan. I'm from Nanxing's Ningzhou. I have no relatives in my family. Nanxing's Ningzhou? Yuan Xian's nerves tensed up. His tiger-like eyes seemed to shine with a frightening light. He looked at Hua Yuan with an unfriendly gaze. Nanxing? Why did you come to Dongqing to make a living instead of staying in Nanxing? Yuan Xian did not regret hiring the temporary worker. He was arrogant and conceited. Even if Hua Yuan came with ill intentions, he was not afraid of him causing trouble. The surname Hua is a rare one. Hua Yuan did not mind Yuan Xian's suspicions. Nanman is still wreaking havoc. I fled to Dongqing just to find a way out. Yuan Xian was surprised. The situation in Nanxing has not calmed down? Hua Yuan said, Nanman is powerful. Before I left, I heard that An Shui and Yang Tao joined forces to invite the feudal lords of Nanxing to a meeting to discuss a joint attack on Nanman. I wonder what the outcome is. Regardless of the outcome, the disaster of Nanman cannot be solved in 3 to 5 days. I have to find another way out. Yuan Xian felt sad after hearing this and sighed. Nanman and the northern borderline were known as the malignant tumors of the two foreign tribes. They had always coveted the vast land of the 5 countries in the Central Plains. Dongqing had escaped from the northern borderline, but Nanxing had long been destroyed by Nanman. He knew the methods of the foreign tribes. They were as cruel as uncivilized beasts. It was appalling. It was understandable that Hua Yuan had gone to Dongqing to survive. Yuan Xian tested Hua Yuan's talent. He did not know how Hua Yuan compared to Nie Sun and the others, but he was indeed extraordinary. Yuan Xian also ordered people to prepare a sumptuous dinner for Hua Yuan. Although Hua Yuan's body was a little thin, his appetite was not small. He ate 3 servings of food on his own, and the way he ate also made people wonder if this fellow had never eaten a delicious meal in his life. Hua Yuan ate until he was full. I've only been eating cold water to fill my stomach for several days. I'm starving. If I've been rude, please forgive me, General. Yuan Xian couldn't get angry. After all, Hua Yuan's performance proved that what he said was true. He finished everything without wasting a single grain of rice. After eating and drinking to his heart's content, Yuan Xian told Hua Yuan about the problem that had been troubling him for the past few days. Hua Yuan said, I've been on the run for the past few days. I've heard about Lu Shi's troops causing trouble in Qinzhou. Yuan Xian gnashed his teeth in hatred and said angrily, they've gone too far. When he thought of the tens of thousands of soldiers and horses that had been sacrificed, his heart was still bleeding. He wished he could run to Jiang Pingji and fight it out with her. Hua Yuan asked in surprise, I heard that the enemy brought 70 to 80,000 soldiers? Yuan Xian corrected him impatiently, at most 50,000. Hua Yuan said, an army of 50,000 consumes 500 dawn of food a day. How much food can they bring with them when they travel light? Yuan Xian said, they're using war to nourish war and plunder the Qinzhou grain depot to replenish themselves. Hua Yuan said, since the enemy is using war to nourish war, why don't you use the strategy of fortifying the walls and clearing the fields so that they have no food to take? Yuan Xian was speechless. It wasn't like he didn't know about fortifying the walls and clearing the fields. He just felt that he could defeat the enemy head-on and didn't need to play any tricks. Fortifying the walls and clearing the fields was a method that would kill 1,000 enemies and cost 800 of his own men. He didn't want to use it unless he had no other choice. In fact, Nie Sun had mentioned it to him several times, but Yuan Xian felt that Nie Sun was denying his strength by preventing him from fighting the enemy head-on, so he didn't listen. Now that he had suffered a great loss, Yuan Xian knew that he was in trouble. Naturally, he had to find a way to make up for it. He asked Hua Yuan patiently, the enemy has already looted half of Qinzhou. Is there any use in fortifying the walls and clearing the fields? Of course there's a use. The enemy has 50,000 men and horses. Consuming food is a huge problem. Why don't you set up a trap to lure the enemy deep into Qinzhou, cut off their escape route and trap them for a few days? Hua Yuan said, if you don't do that, they'll do the same thing and cause trouble in Haozhou again. Yuan Xian's face darkened when he heard that. If Haozhou was also harmed, Yuan Xian would commit suicide as an apology, even without his Lord Huang Song's order to investigate who was responsible. If Jiang Pingji wasn't so rational and decisive, if she was a little greedy and unwilling to give up the results of the battle, she might really fall into the trap. The greedier a person was, the more they liked to take risks. This mentality was similar to that of a gambler. If he bet correctly, he would turn the tables immediately. If he bet wrongly, he would lose everything. Yuan Xan followed Hua Yuan's suggestion and transported the stored grain from the various depots to lure Jiang Pingji to chase after them. At the same time, he paid close attention to the movements of the army. Unfortunately, Jiang Pingji wasn't a kind person. She wouldn't be greedy and rash like Yuan Xan. They retreated as soon as they said so, showing no mercy. After all, Hua Yuan was a temporary worker. Yuan Xan didn't trust him completely. There were many things that he wasn't qualified to do. Hua Yuan, who had some free time, began to listen to gossip. For example, Yuan Xan's various pasts, as well as the unlucky guy before he applied for the temporary job, Nie Sun's love and hatred. "General, did you really kill military advisor Nie at the front lines?" Hua Yuan asked with a smile. He wasn't worried that he would follow in Nie Sun's footsteps. The soldier said, "No, he didn't. The military advisor is still alive. I heard from the military doctor that his condition is very serious. He has been ill for almost half a month." Hua Yuan said, "I've been with the general for 2 days. I feel that he isn't a difficult person to get along with. Why is his relationship with the military advisor so bad?" "How would he know?" The soldier sighed. "Our general is good in every way, but he has a bad temper. Young man, you've taken over the position of military advisor. You have to be careful." Nie Sun was almost hacked to death by Yuan Xan. Military advisor was really a high-risk job. Hua Yuan waved his hand to indicate that he understood. He was different from Nie Sun. Nie Sun was Yuan Xan's serious colleague. He was just a temporary worker who was begging for a living. He didn't have to put in his best effort. "Where is the military advisor recuperating now? I want to visit him." Although Hua Yuan was a temporary worker, he had a certain level of authority. He naturally wouldn't be stopped from visiting Nie Sun. Nie Sun had already survived the critical period. He still looked very thin, but his mind was clear. He would be able to recover after recuperating properly. Hearing that someone wanted to visit him, and a stranger at that, Nie Sun raised his eyebrows. He coldly allowed the person to enter. Hua Yuan said that he wanted to see Nie Sun, but he was really just taking a look. The two of them only looked at each other and didn't say anything else. Until, "I heard that the military advisor wrote a letter asking his wife and daughter to seek refuge with the Yu clan?" Nie Sun, who was lying motionless on the ground, didn't move his eyelids. He rolled his eyes filled with indifference. Sun's life was in danger at that time. I didn't know if he would survive. I could only prepare for the worst and settle my wife and daughter first. Hua Yuan smiled meaningfully. Chapter 1275. After Hua Yuan said this, Nie Sun's face showed exhaustion. His eyes were half closed, covering the strange emotion that surged in his eyes. Neither of them spoke again. The air was almost stagnant, and a strange atmosphere filled the air as if they were having a silent contest. "This student admires military advisor Nie very much. I am indignant when I heard what happened to military advisor." After a while, Hua Yuan suddenly smiled and said, "Hearing about him is not as good as meeting him in person. Military advisor is still thinking about the Lord and his family when his life is in danger. Such noble character is truly a role model for us." Nie Sun's expression was calm as he said, "Sun is but a nobody, I'm not worthy of such praise." Hua Yuan smiled and took a few steps forward as if they were familiar with each other. He sat directly beside Nie Sun's bed. The two were only a few steps away from each other. He lowered his voice and said, "If military advisor is also considered a nobody, how many talents in the world would be ashamed?" Nie Sun ignored him and continued to lie on his back. His eyes stared upwards with an empty gaze. Hua Yuan continued, "I admit that I'm inferior to the military advisor's ability to scheme against others." Nie Sun's gaze moved. His expression did not change, but killing intent surged in his heart. "What scheming?" "I heard that military advisor and general are in conflict and have been at odds for a long time." Hua Yuan said, "General ignored military advisor's advice and insisted on using troops against the enemy. In the end, he lost more than 10,000 soldiers and horses. You didn't reflect on your actions and used a saber on the military counselor, almost causing him to lose his life. If these two incidents were to reach the Lord's ears, the general would be demoted and stripped of his power. If it were to be serious, he would be punished by military law." Nie Sun had mentioned Hua Yuan's suggestions to Yuan Xan, but Yuan Xan did not believe the latter but the former. How could Yuan Xan easily believe the words of a temporary worker? It was only because the time and place were different, and the person speaking was different. Firstly, when Nie Sun advised Yuan Xan had not suffered a setback. Instead he was calm, content and confident. Secondly, Nie Sun and Yuan Xian's relationship that had improved with great difficulty deteriorated again. This made Yuan Xian feel even more disgusted and suspicious of Nie Sun, which led to rebellious thoughts. Nie Sun was also tricked by Feng Jin, which made Yuan Xian highly suspicious of the value of Nie Sun's suggestions. When it was Hua Yuan's turn, Yuan Xian was already hopping around anxiously. On the surface he still looked so conceited, but in his heart he was extremely anxious. He urgently needed victory and merit to make up for his previous mistakes and losses. He also needed to ask his lord to forgive him for accidentally injuring Nie Sun. If Yuan Xian had performed a meritorious service, then Huang Song would not pursue the matter on account of his meritorious service, and would not be able to support Nie Sun. Taking 10,000 steps back, even if Yuan Xian supported Nie Sun, Yuan Xian could escape the death penalty. At most he would be demoted and lose his salary. Apart from that, Yuan Xian did not think that a poor scholar would be able to scheme against him, so he reluctantly used Hua Yuan's suggestion. The general knows the pros and cons of this. If he wants to avoid censure, he can only make up for his mistakes with his meritorious service. Before that, he won't let you know what he's done. Hua Yuan smiled and said, "The military counselor is well aware of this, so he chose this time to write a will to his wife and daughter, asking them to seek refuge with the Yu family in Wanzhou. Because not only will the general not tell the lord about the will, but he will also help the military counselor conceal it." If Huang Song knew that Nie Sun had written a will to his wife, wouldn't Yuan Xian be confessing without being pressed? As long as they avoided Huang Song, Yuan Xian would turn a blind eye because of his guilty conscience, and Nie Sun's wife and daughter would be able to leave this place safely. From the beginning to the end, Nie Sun had schemed against Yuan Xian. Yuan Xian had unknowingly become a knife in Nie Sun's hands. Hua Yuan asked with a smile, "I heard that the military counselor was on the verge of death several times. How can I not admire him for being able to scheme so accurately under such circumstances?" Substantial killing intent flashed in Nie Sun's eyes, but his tone of voice was very calm and indifferent. "I don't understand what you're talking about. Sending away my wife and daughter and planning for the rest of their lives is just the instinct and duty of a husband and father." The corners of Nie Sun's lips curled into a bitter smile. "I don't even know if I can survive such an injury. Naturally, I have to plan for the worst." Hua Yuan said, "To be precise, it should be a double plan, right?" Nie Sun's hand that was placed by his side suddenly clenched, almost tearing at the healing wound. "If the military counselor unfortunately dies, your wife and daughter will naturally be safe for the rest of their lives with the protection of the Yu family. If the military advisor is lucky enough to survive and send them away." Hua Yuan grinned as he looked at Nie Sun. His pitch-black eyes caused one to shudder, and they were like a deep and icy cold pool. "The military advisor will have nothing to worry about anymore. In my opinion, the military counselor is not a kind person. Will he really be able to take this lying down?" The literati of this era had nothing else but tough bones, bad tempers, arrogant personalities and fierce actions. Buddhist? No way. Even if Wei Xiai and Feng Jin, who were known to have good tempers, looked modest, polite and gentle on the surface, if they really crossed their bottom line, no one would be easy to deal with. Even if Nie Sun looked harmless, Hua Yuan's sharp senses could smell the hidden danger under the calm surface. This matter between Nie Sun and Yuan Xian would not be resolved peacefully. Sun and General Yuan Xian are both under the Lord's command. There are occasional conflicts, but it's not a big deal. Nie Sun turned to look at Hua Yuan and asked with a faint smile, "Do you think that Sun will ignore the big picture and cause a scandal of civil and military infighting to embarrass the Lord?" Hua Yuan was stunned after hearing this, as if he did not expect Nie Sun to answer like this. Did his words mean that he would take this lying down and not care about Yuan Xian's mistakes? Although Sun and General Yuan Xian have conflicts, it is not fair and just for the Lord to judge. No matter how wrong the general is, only the Lord can convict him. Nie Sun said calmly, "My wife and daughter seeking refuge with the Yu family will indeed attract criticism at this time. When Sun's health is better and the war situation is settled, I will think of a way to bring them back. I already have a plan for this matter, you don't have to worry about it." Speaking of this, Nie Sun's tone was slightly unfriendly, as if he was very dissatisfied with Hua Yuan's provocation. To put it bluntly, Nie Sun did not know Hua Yuan at all. He did not even know the other's name or courtesy name. Hua Yuan's random guesses and meddling in other people's affairs would also make others angry. Hua Yuan's expression changed and he hurriedly bowed in apology. I was reckless and impulsive, please forgive me, military counselor. The corners of his mouth curled up, but there was no trace of a smile in his eyes. Nie Sun closed his eyes slightly and calmly asked him to leave. Hua Yuan obediently retreated. After he left, Nie Sun looked like he was struggling. He was deciding whether he should take Hua Yuan's life or not. There was no lack of smart people in the world, but smart people who could not control their mouths usually did not live long. Not long after, Yuan Xan knew that Hua Yuan had gone to see Nie Sun. He asked in a seemingly casual manner, "Why did you go to see him?" Hua Yuan said, "There were some things that I did not understand, so I went to consult the military counselor. That person is just an empty shell. He is not even as good as a poor scholar like you." Yuan Xan curled his lips and said, "How is his recovery?" Hua Yuan thought for a while. The military doctor was probably Yuan Xian's man, and Nie Sun's physical condition could not be hidden from Yuan Xian. Hence, Hua Yuan said, "The military counselor's complexion is pale, but he seems to be in good spirits." Chapter 1276. When Yuan Xian acted, he really wanted Nie Sun to die. After calming down for so many days, he was actually glad that the other party was still alive. If Nie Sun died, this matter would be stuck in Lord's heart for the rest of her life. Yuan Xian would not be able to be put in an important position in the future. Not only that, it might even implicate the descendants of Yuan Xian's bloodline. With this thought in mind, when Yuan Xian learned that Nie Sun was gradually getting out of danger and that his wounds were starting to heal, he turned a blind eye and did not ask the military doctor to do anything. In the future, there would be many opportunities to find trouble with Nie Sun. There was no need to rush. Yuan Xian's tiger eyes seemed to shine as he asked, "What else did you talk about?" Hua Yuan smiled and said, "I tried to ask for guidance for a while, but the military advisor's energy is not enough. I can only take my leave regrettably." Yuan Xan curled his lips in disdain and said mockingly, "He's quite refined. He only took a knife and made himself look like a woman within a month." What was within the moon? If Yuan Xian's words were heard by Nie Sun, wouldn't he go crazy with anger? Hua Yuan listened quietly at the side with a faint smile on his face. His presence was so low that it was like a wall in the background. Yuan Xian could not be bothered to mention Nie Sun anymore. He was more worried about the situation at the front line. He followed Hua Yuan's instructions, but the results were minimal. The bait was set, but the big fish refused to take the bait. When Hua Yuan heard about this, he asked in surprise, "Who is the enemy general? Why is he so cautious and difficult to deal with?" Yuan Xin said in distress, "This general doesn't know either. The scouts didn't find anything either. All they know is that it's a young, unfamiliar general. He did not meet Jiang Pingji face to face. The scouts who went out to investigate did not know what Jiang Pingji looked like. Jiang Pingji was always dressed as a man in the army. Most of the time, she wore a heavy military uniform and armor. She wore a helmet that covered both sides of her face. People who were not familiar with her could easily mistake her gender. Everyone in the world knew that the Duchess of Lanting was the only female vassal, so it was impossible to link it to her. Because of the mismatch in information, no one had discovered that the seriously ill Jiang Pingji had been wandering in the rear of Qinzhou for almost a month. Hua Yuan shook his head. If it was a young general, it was even more impossible. Yuan Xan asked, "What's wrong with that?" Hua Yuan said, "General, put yourself in their shoes and think about it. If you were their general, would you follow up with a successful pursuit or retreat?" Yuan Xan was stunned for a moment, then said decisively, "Of course it's to retreat in the face of danger." Because of the omniscient view, Yuan Xian knew that it was a trap to strengthen the defense and clear the field. Of course, he would not say that he would foolishly follow up on his victory. Hua Yuan continued, "If you don't know anything, the advantage lies with you. You only need to follow the prescribed order and pursue the enemy, and you'll be able to increase the results of the battle by several times. In the face of such a huge temptation, will the general really give up the heavenly merit that is within easy reach at this critical moment?" Yuan Xan blushed and said reluctantly, "Of course I'm unwilling. No one would remain unmoved in the face of benefits that were easily obtainable." Hua Yuan added, "Even a general is like this, let alone an unknown young general. Young generals admittedly had their merits, but they also had many shortcomings such as eagerness for quick success and instant benefits, instability, lack of experience and so on. Yuan Xian's character were flawed, but his combat experience was unquestionable. Otherwise, Huang Song would not have given him so many opportunities. Even Yuan Xan would take the risk, let alone an impatient and immature young general, and an unfamiliar young general. An unfamiliar face meant that he was not famous, and a young general meant that he was young and inexperienced. Logically speaking, this person's desire to achieve success was stronger than that of a normal general. But in the end? In the face of temptation, he was not moved, and he retreated in the face of danger without lingering to fight. How was he like a young and inexperienced fledgling? Yuan Xan regained his composure and said, "According to what you're saying, the commanding general is someone else?" Hua Yuan's expression was solemn as he said, "The general is experienced and knowledgeable. Who do you think this style resembles?" Yuan Xan thought carefully under Hua Yuan's reminder. As he thought, he said, "There are only a few famous generals under Lu Shi. Each of them has their own temperament and the way they do things are very different. This decisive style, it's not easy to guess. Perhaps it's a new face." Although he did not want to admit it, Lu Shi was already a feudal lord who dominated more than half of Dongqing and the northern borderline. Even if she was a woman, she could bring benefits. As long as there were benefits to be gained, there would naturally be people who would rush to join her. It was not unusual for a new face to join her camp. Yuan Xan said, "Why, you don't agree?" Hua Yuan smiled bitterly and said, "I am indeed a little narrow-minded. Do you think this style is like the Lord of Lanting himself?" Yuan Xan was so shocked that he almost bit his tongue. What did he hear? Lu Shi? Yuan Xan shook his head and said, "Impossible, impossible. Lu Shi was seriously ill because of her grandmother's death. I heard that she almost lost her life. Why would she risk her life to come to Qinzhou? If she came to Qinzhou, who would be guarding the front line? This speculation is too absurd and ridiculous." According to a normal person's thinking, Yuan Xian's words were not wrong. Jiang Pingji was out of her mind, but the people under her command should have brains. How could they allow their lord to leave the front line and enter the enemy's rear? Hua Yuan saw Yuan Xian's confident expression and smiled embarrassedly. "You're right, counselor. I was thinking too much." Although there was no evidence, Hua Yuan still felt that it was Jiang Pingji. He had studied the few battles that Jiang Pingji had led. Her distinct personal style left a deep impression. She had shown her decisive side since the first battle against the Tsing-Yi army. She was always so sober and calm, as if she was standing on the sidelines from the beginning to the end. Would such a sober person really disregard the overall situation and risk running to the enemy's rear? Yuan Xan said, "If the enemy doesn't take the bait, think of another way." Hua Yuan came back to his senses and said with a smile, "I have a plan here. Counselor, please listen." The two of them talked in low voices. Yuan Xian's eyes became brighter and brighter. Jiang Pingji sneezed loudly and rubbed her nose. "I'm afraid Zixiao misses me." Yang Si was speechless. My lord looked down. "That's because you're embarrassing yourself." "I wonder how Huayu's preparations are going." Jiang Pingji planned to retreat after having enough fun. She had disturbed the peace in Qinzhou. Huang Song's head would probably hurt if he heard the news. To prevent the enemy from suddenly becoming smart and running to fight a war of attrition, Jiang Pingji asked Feng Jin to be ready to support her. As long as they crossed the gorge, the army would be safe. Yang Si said, "The news has been spread. Huayu will make the appropriate arrangements." Jiang Pingji was about to nod when she heard the sound of horse hooves. She saw two teams of scouts rushing back to the army. "Report, traces of an ambush have been found ahead." "Ambush?" Jiang Pingji frowned deeply and said unhappily, "It's not easy to fight on other people's home ground. They always set up ambushes. If they accidentally stepped into a trap, Jiang Pingji would lose a lot of troops." Yang Si asked the scout, "How many ambushes have you found out?" The scout said, "According to the traces, there are about 10,000 of them." "More than 10,000 ambushes? So much effort?" If the ambush gained the upper hand, even if Jiang Pingji's side was vigilant, they would lose nearly 10,000 troops if they really fought. Seeing that they were about to leave Qinzhou, Jiang Pingji did not want to increase the number of casualties. She turned her head and asked Yang Si, "Can we go around them?" Yang Si was from Dingjun in Qinzhou. He was very familiar with the terrain. Otherwise, Jiang Pingji would not have dragged him here. Chapter 1277. Let's take a detour if we can. It's good to have fewer casualties. Jiang Pingji quickly made a decision. It was better to do this sooner rather than later. The longer they delayed, the more their food supply would be. Yang Si nodded in agreement. It was fine not to know that there was an enemy ambush ahead, But if they knew and still foolishly went forward, wouldn't they be looking for trouble? After all, he was a native of Qinzhou. Yang Si was still very familiar with his hometown. Even if they took a detour, it would not waste too much time. Jiang Pengji looked at the sky and muttered, "The army will rest in place for an hour. The vanguard scouts will go forward to explore the way." Although it was said to rest in place, the entire army still maintained a defensive formation to prevent the enemy from suddenly rushing out. Jiang Pengji turned over and dismounted. Little White followed behind her obediently. Seeing this, Yang Si also dismounted to rest. "Why are you frowning, my lord?" Yang Si drank a mouthful of water to moisten his throat. After spring it was gradually summer. The weather was getting hotter and hotter. After marching for 2 to 4 hours, one would be sweating profusely. In serious cases, one would even feel that their throats were smoking. "Is there something wrong?" Jiang Pengji said, "I just feel a little strange." "Strange? What's strange?" Yang Si said excitedly, "My lord, why don't you tell me and let me analyze it for you? Maybe I can help you solve your doubts." She shook her head and said, "I can't say what's strange. I just feel a little uncomfortable in my heart." Yang Si was in a dilemma. How should he analyze it? Then, "Can you tell me what makes you uncomfortable?" Yang Si guided her. "What?" Jiang Pengji thought about it and said, "By the way, the ambush that the scouts mentioned just now doesn't feel right." Jiang Pengji had always believed in her intuition, which was a keen sense of danger. It had helped her escape from death several times. Although Jiang Pengji had been in this era for many years, she was more familiar with the way and thinking of war in the interstellar era. Occasionally she would be confused. Yang Si took the initiative to help her solve her doubts, so she said it readily. Maybe he could give her useful advice. Yang Si said, "The ambush just now? My lord, do you think the ambush is a trap?" Jiang Pengji said, "The scouts judged the enemy situation based on the marching traces. Aren't the traces left by more than 10,000 troops too obvious?" As she spoke, her thoughts became more and more clear. An ambush with more than 10,000 soldiers is already considered a big move. Even our scouts were able to discover the obvious traces on the ground. The enemy wouldn't fall for it so easily. Are the Yuanxing collective blind to not see it? That's right. What? When Jiang Pengji said that, she suddenly felt that there was some kind of conspiracy, and it was a targeted conspiracy. If it's an ambush to prevent the enemy from being vigilant, it's natural to erase the traces of the army as much as possible, so that the enemy can enter the ambush site unprepared. Yang Si also pondered along this path. The more he thought about it, the more he felt that something was wrong, and his heart was filled with doubts. My lord's suspicions are correct. The enemy tried to ambush us but left such an obvious flaw. This move is really suspicious. After a while, Yang Si suddenly thought of what Jiang Pengji had just said. He said, "Just now, the scouts reported that there were more than 10,000 soldiers lying in ambush in front of us. My lord said, if we can take a detour then we should. It's good to have fewer casualties." Looking at it now, this ambush seemed to be specifically targeted at the Lord. Because the Lord was naturally vigilant, once she knew that there was an ambush ahead, she would definitely choose to take a detour. Could it be that the ambush ahead was fake and the real ambush was on the path we took to take a detour? Jiang Pengji shook her head. "It's hard to say. The only thing I'm sure of is that there is indeed an ambush ahead." Although the live stream was useless except for chatting, Jiang Pengji was a person who was good at making use of others. She would try her best to use all resources to achieve her goals. The camera in the live stream could overlook the ground from a certain height. After Jiang Pengji adjusted the angle of the camera in the live stream, she did indeed discover many ambushes. In other words, if Jiang Pengji did not take a detour, she would still be ambushed. Yang Si was puzzled after hearing this. What was going on? Looking at it now, it was not a good idea to take a detour, but it was also not a good idea to not take a detour. It made people panic. What is that boorish man Yuan Xian up to? Jiang Pengji said, "It's impossible for Yuan Xian to do this. He doesn't have the brains to think about such complicated things. This doesn't seem like Nie Sun's style either. I dare not say that I understand Nie Sun very well, but things like style are personal characteristics. Nie Sun's style is not like this. Didn't Nie Sun get slashed by Yuan Xian and almost lose his life? Scholars have always been proud and unyielding. Nie Sun dislikes Yuan Xian, so he probably won't give him advice despite his illness," Yang Si said. "There are many talents under Yuan Xian's banner. It's hard to say which one of them made a move." Jiang Pengji smiled and said, "I have a hunch that this person is coming for me." Yang Si also said that the ambush seemed to be aimed at her, or it could be said that it was aimed at her cautious and thorough character. In order not to increase the number of casualties, Jiang Pingji would definitely choose to take a detour when she knew that there was an ambush. As they were talking, the scouts in the vanguard rushed back one after another. The situation along the way was good, and it was suitable for marching. Jiang Pingji said, "We've rested enough. Let's continue on our way." Because of their suspicions, Jiang Pingji and the others were especially careful when marching. The whole army was always in a state of facing the enemy. Yang Si looked around at the surroundings and said, "The terrain here is open. It's not suitable for an ambush. We should be safe." Jiang Pingji nodded and looked back at the army that was still orderly. She could not help but frown. Everyone has worked hard for the day. Let's rest here for the night. We'll continue marching tomorrow. There was a water source nearby. It was convenient for the cooks to wash the rice, set up a fire to cook and replenish their water pouches. The viewers in the live stream room also tensed up. When they heard that she was going to rest, they hurriedly reminded her to pay attention to the water source. That was natural. Jiang Pingji was very cautious about what she drank. She was only willing to drink drinking water after it was boiled. During ancient wars, there were many examples of enemies poisoning upstream. Jiang Pingji naturally would not make such a low-level mistake. After a round of inspection, the water source was normal. Upon reaching this conclusion, Jiang Pingji did not breathe a sigh of relief. Instead, she frowned even more. The next day, the army found traces of what seemed to be an ambush in front of them. "Can we take a detour?" Jiang Pingji asked again. Yang Si frowned and said, "Yes, but the army has to turn around and march 3 to 5 miles. The journey will be half a day later than expected." The army's journey was calculated. If they exceeded this time, they would face the pressure of a shortage of military rations. Jiang Pingji said, "Take a detour." Yang Si hurriedly said, "But my lord," Jiang Pingji said, "I want to know what the other party is up to. I've seen some clues. It's only half a day. It's not a big deal." Helpless, Yang Si could only comply. A strange and tense atmosphere pervaded the whole army. The officers and soldiers did not understand why they had to take a detour several times. Chapter 1278. Sure enough, one day after the second detour, they ran into another ambush. Yang Si's eyes were filled with astonishment as he suddenly understood. "Your Highness, Yuan Xin is trying to drag us to death." The longer they marched, the more rations they consumed. If they couldn't meet up with Feng Jin and the others before their rations ran out, a total of 50,000 soldiers might really be killed here by someone's scheme. At the thought of that possibility, Yang Si felt both relieved and scared. It's not as simple as delaying time. Didn't you notice that the soldiers' energy is also depleted very quickly? Jiang Pingji said, "Because there's an ambush, the soldiers have to raise their spirits to deal with it. It's fine if it's only for a short while, but if it's like this for a few days in a row, he won't have enough energy, and his combat strength will definitely drop." His spirit wasn't good and he was hungry. How much of his battle prowess could he display? Yang Si said, "My lord, what should we do now?" Jiang Pingji retorted, "What do you think?" Yang Si said, "Instead of being so timid, why don't we go all out and kill our way out? We can't lose the bigger picture because of a small gain." Yang Si would really vomit blood if he lost 50,000 troops and a lord because he was afraid of losing a few thousand troops. Jiang Pingji sneered as she unsheathed the god-slaying sword from her waist. The shiny blade shone with a piercing white light under the reflection of the sun. What a coincidence, I was thinking the same thing. Jiang Pingji had never been a person who was afraid of battles. She was cautious by nature, but that did not mean that she was timid and would not lose sight of the bigger picture. After being schemed against like this, if she didn't take revenge, she would really be looked down upon. Continue advancing. If they continued to fight like this, their morale, combat strength, and the energy of their soldiers would be greatly reduced. At that time they wouldn't have the strength to fight even if they wanted to. It's like boiling a frog in warm water. Jiang Pingji said, "The other party took advantage of the fact that I didn't want to increase the number of casualties and designed the so-called ambush. They made us take a detour unknowingly and did useless work. If I had chosen to avoid the battle for this reason, I would have fallen into the enemy's trap. It was a good idea to slowly whittle down their forces bit by bit. Moreover, the rations along the way had already been cleared by the enemy. We don't have any supplies and we're in a desperate situation. We can only wait for death. I'd like to meet the person who came up with the idea." Yang Si shook his head. Judging from the layout, He has a good understanding of the situation in Qinzhou and the speed of our army's march. If he doesn't understand it, any mistake in any part of the process would be useless. If Jiang Pingji's marching speed was faster than expected and they happened to bump into Jiang Pingji's army when they were preparing to set up an ambush, they would be courting death. If Jiang Pingji's marching speed was slower than expected, the current effect would not be achieved. Only by calculating everything perfectly could one press on step by step and force the enemy to run for their lives. Jiang Pingji sneered. No matter how good the idea is, once it's seen through, it's worthless. She's afraid of ambushes? Of course she was not afraid. So what if there was an ambush? Not to mention 10,000 ambushing soldiers, even 50,000 ambushing soldiers would not be able to stop all of her troops. If the target was wary, the effectiveness of the ambush would be greatly reduced. A smile appeared at the corner of Yang Xi's lips. He really liked to see his lord's confident expression. No one wanted to follow a timid, weak and incompetent lord. It was so frustrating to be a subordinate. According to Hua Yuan's calculations, Jiang Pingji should endure for a while more before exploding. She had stepped into the trap that he had set up, which was extremely suitable for an ambush. Unexpectedly, her temper was more irritable than Hua Yuan had imagined. She could not hold it in any longer. She could not bear it anymore. There was no need to bear it anymore. Faced with Jiang Pingji's unconventional actions, Yuan Xan was the first to be dumbfounded. Because Hua Yuan had calculated correctly twice, Yuan Xan was not so concerned about the ambush this time. Would Jiang Pingji be lured away by a casual gesture? No matter how perfect the ambush was, wouldn't it be a waste? Unexpectedly, Jiang Pingji rushed over with her troops, causing Yuan Xan to be flustered. Jiang Pingji had always been a decisive person. She did things cleanly and efficiently without procrastinating. Since she had made up her mind to force her way through, of course, she would not give the enemy time to prepare mentally. Yuan Xan was furious. The blue veins on his forehead bulged from the force of his jaw. These literati are really not trustworthy at all. Hua Yuan's calculations were wrong. Yuan Xan was forced into a passive position. He was the one who ambushed, but now it was as if he had been ambushed by Jiang Pingji. Yuan Xan was arrogant and conceited. Of course, he would not look for the reason for his failure from himself. Instead, he looked for Hua Yuan's fault. After all, Hua Yuan was only a temporary worker without an official position. He came from a humble background. His life was equivalent to that of an ant in Yuan Xan's eyes. Did Yuan Xan have to admit that it was not the temporary worker's fault but his? Seeing that the enemy's army was getting closer and closer, Yuan Xan's side could only choose to fight hastily. Because Jiang Pingji had discovered it early and Yuan Xan's side was not fully prepared, the so-called ambush did not achieve the desired effect. Even so, Yuan Xan still caused a certain number of casualties on Jiang Pingji's side. Compared to the losses suffered in a proper ambush, this number of casualties was still within an acceptable range. Seeing that the scale of the battle was tilting towards Jiang Pingji's side, Yuan Xan could only stop his losses in time. He retreated angrily, leaving 3,000 to 4,000 corpses behind. This battle was unexpectedly easy to fight. Jiang Pingji shook her head. It's really infuriating to meet a general like Yuan Xan. According to the footage captured by the camera in the streaming room, the previous two ambushes had taken a lot of effort. If Jiang Pingji had really charged in, she would have lost at least 5,000 troops and horses. However, the two arrangements were not put to use. Yuan Xan's side slacked off and planned to simply fool people. Unexpectedly, Jiang Pingji did not play by the rules this time. Not only did she not choose to take a detour, but she also led her troops to attack. How could a shoddy construction withstand Jiang Pingji's violent destruction? Yang Xi wiped the blood off his face with a handkerchief. As he tidied up his appearance, he said, "My heart aches for Nye Sun." Jiang Pingji said, "Yuan Xan has reminded me that the military reform should be brought forward. If a general tampered with military orders and strategies because of his own selfishness, or if he responded perfunctorily, Yuan Xan was a good example. The commander-in-chief had sole authority in the military. It was fine if he met a reliable one, but if he was unreliable, Jiang Pingji could not help but frown. She did not have many generals under her command. Other than a few who were highly valued, the new people who were promoted later on were still inexperienced and could not take charge independently. Inexperience meant that they had little experience and were easy to be schemed against. Of course, it was better to politely decline a veteran general like Yuan Xan who took advantage of his seniority, who was conceited, confident, and arrogant. Of course Yang Si knew about the military reform. His lord had mentioned it several times, but because the time was not ripe, she did not put it into action. Military reform? My lord, you'll take action when you return? Jiang Pingji shook her head. I'll take action after I defeat Bogeo. The impact of the military reform now is too great. She wanted to restrict the commander-in-chief's military power and command. She did not want to see Yuan Xian appear under her command. Chapter 1279. Yuan Xian returned pathetically and immediately sent someone to question Hua Yuan. In the end, General, he's gone. Yuan Xian was waiting for Hua Yuan. He never expected to hear this answer. Hua Yuan was gone. Gone? How could he be gone? Look everywhere, I want to see him alive or dead. Yuan Xian frowned. He had a belly full of anger that had no outlet to vent. At this moment, he was angry and aggrieved, like an angry beast that had been injured. The soldier anxiously lowered his head and did not dare to be negligent. He quickly retreated to find Hua Yuan. Naturally, they could not find him because Hua Yuan had already left. You still haven't found him? Yuan Xian waited for a long time. The anger in his heart licked his liver. As time passed, the ominous feeling in his heart grew stronger. The soldier's heart trembled because of fear, his entire body trembled like a sieve. I haven't found him. I've searched everywhere but I can't find any trace. It's as if he disappeared into thin air. Really disappeared? Yuan Xian slowly digested this news. His mind was in a mess. All kinds of conspiracy theories were competing in his mind. Why did Hua Yuan run away? Could it be that he was a spy sent by the enemy? On the surface he was giving advice to him, but in reality he was helping the thief escape? If that was the case, everything would make sense. Yuan Xian's livid face suddenly turned pale. Quickly search and see if anything is missing. Also send out a notice to arrest Hua Yuan. The soldiers searched Hua Yuan's temporary residence. Yuan Xian also buried himself in checking his commander's seal and all kinds of documents. The result was confusing. When Hua Yuan left, he did not take anything valuable with him. He did not even take his newly tailored clothes with him. Yuan Xian did not lose his commander's seal, personal seal, documents. Not a single one was missing. They were all in their original places. If Hua Yuan was really a spy sent by the enemy, why did he not take these? Yuan Xian was confused and glad at the same time. He was confused by Hua Yuan's actions and glad that Hua Yuan did not take advantage of the situation. Could it be that he knew he was useless and was afraid that I would blame him, so he left first? Yuan Xian thought. He felt that this guess was the most likely. Although he was unhappy that Hua Yuan had escaped, compared to the worst situation, the current situation was already very good. Yuan Xian said angrily, he got off lightly. If he could capture Hua Yuan, he would definitely skin this fellow alive to vent the hatred in his heart. Where was Hua Yuan right now? The wheels of the carriage rolled forward, and Hua Yuan's soft humming could be faintly heard from the bumpy carriage. Huang Song's defeat is certain. I'm afraid he's no match for Lu Shi. Hua Yuan was still in his original shabby attire. His legs were crossed inelegantly and his back was bent forward lazily. His body swayed along with the jolting ox cart. In the carriage there was a young man about 11 or 12 years old. The young man was dressed in ordinary clothes, but he had an air of nobility about him. His features were elegant and handsome. Anyone who saw him would praise him as a good seedling, and his future could be seen. The youth asked in surprise, "Sir, are you so sure?" Hua Yuan sneered. According to Huang Song's plan, he handed Qinzhou over to Yuan Xian to give him the cold shoulder. The situation at the front line was critical, and Lu Shi was seriously ill. They only needed to stabilize the situation at the back. Yuan Xian's temperament wasn't that great, but he was an old general after all. He had a lot of experience, so he was still able to maintain his position. But Huang Song didn't expect Lu Shi to not only not be seriously ill, but also to bring troops to Qinzhou. Lu Shi brought troops. The youth's eyes widened in disbelief. He came to Qinzhou at this time? Qinzhou was Huang Song's rear. As the lord, it was one thing for her to pretend to be sick, but how could she bring 50,000 troops deep into the enemy's territory? If they were to fail and Huang Song got a big bargain, he would laugh his head off in his dreams. Although there's no evidence, it's not far off. Hua Yuan said. I wasn't sure at first until I saw the news that Feng Jin was personally leading troops to guard both sides of the river. Think about it, with Feng Jin's background, if it weren't for Lu Shi, why would he need to be so energetic? Anyone else could have done the job of garrisoning troops on both sides of the gorge. In comparison, Sangzhou was more important to Feng Jin. And the result? Feng Jin didn't guard Sangzhou. Instead, he chose to stay at the front line of the river where the security was tight. How could there be nothing fishy about it? The person who led 50,000 troops to create chaos in Qinzhou was more valuable than Sangzhou. Other than Feng Jin's lord Lu Shi, who else could do it? It was precisely because Jiang Pingji was the one leading the troops that Hua Yuan was certain that Yuan Xin was no match for her. If Yuan Xin followed his plan, even if he couldn't seriously injure Jiang Pingji, he could at least kill half of her troops. But Hua Yuan thought about Yuan Xin's character and didn't think it was a good idea. After all, a dog can't change its habit. To avoid being implicated, he slipped away as soon as possible. Besides, he had already achieved his goal, so there was no need to waste time on Yuan Xin. Because of Lu Shi, having Yuan Xin guard the rear was the biggest mistake. Lu Shi is very cunning, how could he miss such a good opportunity? Hua Yuan turned to the youth and analyzed patiently. Even if Yuan Xin didn't die at Lu Shi's hands, he won't live for long. The youth asked, why? Hua Yuan said, Nie Sun wants to kill Yuan Xin and will take action in a few days. Yuan Xin can escape from the knife outside, but can he defend against his own people? Even if Nie Sun's performance was flawless, Hua Yuan still saw a familiar look in his eyes. It was a deep hatred for the enemy. Hua Yuan understood that look all too well. Nie Sun was not a bodhisattva who bemoaned the state of the universe and pitted the fate of mankind. He would not easily forgive Yuan Xin. As long as he found an opportunity, Nie Sun would set up a trap to take Yuan Xin's life. The youth lowered his head and thought for a long time before saying, the situation in Dongqing looks much simpler than in Nanxing, but if we look deeper, the waters are deeper. Hua Yuan said, when Huang Song's halberd sinks into the sand, it won't be just Dongqing that will be complicated. I'm afraid the entire 5 countries will be affected. The youth asked, the 5 countries? Including Nanxing? Hua Yuan said, including Nanxing. The youth revealed a trace of fear and said softly, teacher, I'm a little worried. Hua Yuan said, the person who is worried about this is the Lord, not the young master. The youth said, I am one with my father. What he is worried about is what I am worried about. This youth was the heir of Anshui. Because of the calamity of Nanman, Anshui's children died. After that, he went into exile in Dongqing and suffered a lot. His body was injured and it was difficult for him to have children. In desperation, he could only adopt the child of the same clan as his heir and make him the young master to reassure the people. Hua Yuan did not comment on the youth's words. After a while, the youth said, with this batch of provisions, father will have nothing to worry about. Hua Yuan responded vaguely. On the other side, Nie Sun also received news of Hua Yuan's disappearance. He frowned and thought about his brief meeting and conversation with Hua Yuan. He had a vague feeling that something was wrong. He seemed to have overlooked something. Nie Sun called someone over and asked about Hua Yuan's movements in detail, as well as what advice he had given to Yuan Xin. After asking in detail, Nie Sun had to admit that Hua Yuan's strategy was not bad. Unfortunately, Yuan Xin, the useless teammate, was a hindrance. Fortify the defense and clear the field? He didn't listen to me no matter what I said, but he listened to Hua Yuan's advice. Nie Sun felt a little stifled. His desire to kill Yuan Xin grew stronger. Wait, repeat what you just said. Nie Sun's heart skipped a beat. Chapter 1280. Speaking of which, no one would believe that Hua Yuan didn't come to Dongqing from Nanxing to cheat Yuan Xian, Huang Song, or Jiang Pingji. He came with sincerity to borrow grain. Yes, he was right. Hua Yuan's purpose was to lobby the feudal lords and borrow some grain for his lord. The southern barbarians destroyed Nanxing. They also tried to establish a regime to rule over the remnant citizens of Nanxing. Unfortunately, their civilization was more barbaric than the northern borderline. They only knew how to destroy, but they didn't know how to appease the people or recuperate. When they lacked women, they robbed them. When they lacked food, they robbed them. When they lacked money, land, and manpower, they conquered them by force. The people of Nanxing suffered unspeakably. Various forces rose up to fight against the southern barbarians. However, fighting required grain. It would also delay the spring plowing. If the spring plowing was delayed, it meant that a year's harvest would be wasted. The grain shortage would become more severe, which would intensify the war. It was a terrifying vicious cycle. The grain shortage in Nanxing grew larger. Many feudal lords had to live frugally, let alone the small feudal lords who weren't doing very well. and Shui had a firm foothold under Lu Zheng's plan. After annexing a few small feudal lords, his power began to expand. Capital was needed to expand power. And Shui's conditions were too weak. Sometimes he had to seek sponsorship and support to tide them over temporarily. He had no choice but to borrow grain this time. If he couldn't borrow grain, it would be difficult for the people under his rule to survive until the next autumn harvest, let alone recruit soldiers to increase his power. What was borrowing? Temporarily using other people's property. Because of Nanxing's geographical location, they couldn't borrow grain from the southern barbarians. Zhongzhou was too far away. After much thought, they could only set their sights on Dongqing. Who knew that Dongqing would be turned upside down? Jiang Pingji and Huang Song, the plastic siblings, were at each other's throats. Neither of them looked like landlords with surplus grain. Even if they had surplus grain, they wouldn't give up easily. This was Hua Yuan's conclusion after studying their personalities. Jiang Pingji was shrewd and cunning. She wouldn't be at a disadvantage no matter what. Deceiving her was far more difficult than Hua Yuan had imagined. Ordinary people had to pay interest when they borrowed money. Unscrupulous merchants paid interest when they borrowed money. In troubled times, grain was rarer than gold. It was easy to lend grain but difficult to get it back. Jiang Pingji and Shui's friendship was limited to the cooperation of the Red Lotus Group and their brief meeting at the Huangshui meeting. How could he expect her to lend Shui a large batch of grain without interest? Before they arrived in Dongqing, Hua Yuan had some thoughts, but they were gone after that. Before Hua Yuan went out to borrow food, Lu Zheng, the chief strategist in Shui's tent, even gave him a sad poem. Huang Song might have a chance, but Lu Xi is out of the question, Lu Zheng said. When Jiang Pingji was studying in Langya County, he and Jiang Pingji had interacted before. He knew very well how shrewd she was. The 1,000-year-old fox spirit could only be toyed with by her. Even if Hua Yuan was powerful, he would probably be defeated by her. Hua Yuan didn't know how difficult Jiang Pingji's strategy was. He said arrogantly, "How do you know it's impossible if you don't try?" She occupied 70% of the places that produced grain in Dongqing. It was said that she had managed her business well these past few years. She had fought several big battles in other people's territories. The land under her rule had always been prosperous, and she had stored a lot of grain. Speaking of which, Lu Xi is the one who doesn't have to worry about food during the spring festival. Not to mention the assets that Jiang Pingji had earned herself, the funds that Lu Xi had prepared for her were not small. Even if she hadn't reached out to Lu Xi, in the eyes of outsiders, the father and daughter were inseparable. The resources that Lu Xi had accumulated were all for his daughter. Lu Jing shook his head. If you have the chance to see her, you'll know what kind of person she is. Hua Yuan said, "You were friends with her when you were young. What? Was she difficult to deal with in the past?" She was very difficult. When she was studying in Langya, she was the devil that everyone avoided. If you borrowed grain from her, you'd be in a good mood if you paid 90%. If you were more ruthless. Lu Zheng paused at this point and his expression became a little strange. Hua Yuan was speechless. 90% paid 13%. This was not much different from money from the government. The more Lu Zheng said this, the more curious Hua Yuan was about Jiang Pingji. After all, she was the first female lord in history who dared to fight for the world with the male lords. If a woman didn't have extraordinary abilities, how could she convince so many talents to willingly follow her orders? In the end, when Hua Yuan arrived in Dongqing, he found out that the two of them were locked in a fierce battle. Fighting a war was an activity that burned money and food. They didn't even have enough food, so how could they lend it to others? Even if Hua Yuan wanted to borrow money from the government, Huang Song and the others wouldn't let him go. Since he couldn't do it through proper channels, he could only think of a roundabout way to save the country. Hua Yuan carefully studied the entire situation of the war and keenly discovered that Qinzhou was profitable. He immediately rushed to Qinzhou. Yuan Xian and Ye Sun didn't get along. The former hurt the latter with a knife, and he was forced to jump up and down by Jiang Pingji's 50,000 troops. God is helping me. A plan quickly formed in his mind. Hua Yuan rubbed his hands excitedly. He knew how to get something without risking anything. Ye Sun and Yuan Xian didn't get along, and his life was in danger. The possibility of Hua Yuan's identity being exposed was minimized. Yuan Xian was arrogant and unruly. He refuted Ye Sun's suggestion and looked down on Hua Yuan at the same time. He was confident that Hua Yuan wouldn't dare to play tricks. Little did he know that Hua Yuan's ability to manipulate people's hearts was even better than Ye Sun's. He and Ye Sun both proposed to strengthen the defense and clear the field. The only difference was the final disposal of the grain. Nie Sun suggested to send the grain to the border of Haozhou. Not only could it prevent Jiang Pingji from feeding her troops, but it could also support Huang Song's troops at the front line. If Jiang Pingji had no choice but to retreat, the grain could also be transported back to Qinzhou at the fastest speed to appease the people. Hua Yuan's suggestion was completely different. He suggested that Yuan Xan send the grain to the south of Qinzhou because the south was the rear. The reason he gave was also very convincing. He used the grain as bait to lure Jiang Pingji's troops deeper into the enemy's rear. It would be too late for her to retreat. The grain carried by the 50,000 troops wouldn't be enough for them to rush out of Qinzhou. They could only be trapped in the hinterland of Qinzhou and die from a lack of food and water. Little did they know that Hua Yuan gathered the grain to the south of Qinzhou just to make it easier for him to steal. He didn't touch anything in Yuan Xian's letter when he left, but he imitated the notes and seals in Yuan Xian's letter and made a fake transfer order. When Yuan Xian realized that something was wrong, Hua Yuan openly took the grain away. If Jiang Pingji hadn't played her cards irrationally and disrupted the established plan, Yuan Xian might have reacted a few days later. Nie Sun realized that something was wrong and hurriedly informed Yuan Xian to send troops to chase after the grain. Yuan Xian didn't believe it at first. He thought that Nie Sun was deliberately looking for trouble. But when he thought of Hua Yuan's various actions, Yuan Xian was skeptical and sent troops to chase after the grain. It was a difference of 2 to 3 days. When Yuan Xian's troops arrived at the place where the grain was stored, they found that the grain depot was empty. Chapter 1281. Because of Hua Yuan's stroke of genius, Yuan Xian couldn't care less about Jiang Pingji. Jiang Pingji was also puzzled. I just beat up Yuan Xian who ambushed me. Why did he learn to behave? Jiang Pingji was not used to Yuan Xian not causing trouble. She was afraid that the road ahead would be full of traps. Unexpectedly, it was peaceful. Until Jiang Pingji met up with Feng Jin and the others, she did not encounter any obstacles. Yuan Xian could not even protect himself now. He had lost all the surplus food in Qinzhou. How could he still be in the mood to stop her? If it weren't for the supplies in the military camp, perhaps he would be the one who ran out of food now. Feng Jin was equally surprised when he heard Jiang Pingji's words. Yuan Xian is a reckless warrior. He has the most violent temperament. My lord has been causing trouble in Qinzhou for so long. Yuan Xian will definitely not let it go. In the end, there wasn't even a decent obstacle along the way. This is too unusual. Jiang Pingji shrugged her shoulders and complained, this Yuanxin is really confusing. Previously, it was as if he had the help of God, as if his brain that had been forgotten in his mother's womb had grown back. Then he suddenly went crazy and allowed me to lead the troops away. Where did Bogeo find such a clown? If Huang Song could hear her words, he would probably cry out in grievance. If he could, he did not want to find such a clown. His clown was a joker. Yuan Xian was born to be his bane. Feng Jin automatically ignored his lord's derogatory words. He smiled and said, we'll know once we investigate. Let's see what he's up to. When she sent someone to investigate, she found that the atmosphere in Qinzhou was very strange. The situation was so tense that Jiang Pingji suspected that something had happened to Huang Song. Could it be Bogeo? Jiang Pingji thought maliciously. Feng Jin shook his head. If something had happened to Huang Song, there was no reason for there to be no news from the front lines, while Qinzhou was in a state of panic. The biggest possibility was that something had happened to Qinzhou, and it was not a small matter. Jiang Pingji said straightforwardly, then investigate again. Anyway, the person who is most anxious about something happening in Qinzhou is not me but Bogeo. Feng Jin was speechless. His lord's words were very reasonable. Her words were priceless. Nonsense. She usually behaved more casually than anyone else, but once someone touched her eyebrows, she would explode like a firecracker. Yuan Xian could seal some people's mouths, but he couldn't make everyone keep their mouths shut. Not to mention that the food in Qinzhou had been stolen by an unknown force. Those who knew about it were panicking. When the food ran out, the first thing that would be affected was their own interests. There were always big mouths that couldn't keep their secrets. What is the most plastic sentence in the world? It was nothing more than, I'm only telling you because we're brothers/friends. Don't you dare sell me out. I'll never tell anyone. Heaven knows, earth knows, and I know. Don't worry. Within a few days, the so-called secret had spread everywhere. Without food, everyone had to face the pressure of survival. Naturally, the so-called secret could not be kept. Jiang Pingji quickly solved the case. She knew the real reason why Yuanxin did not stop her. This Yuanxin. He's really cunning. He's a professional betrayer. Jiang Pingji could not help but give Yuan Xian a thumbs up. Not only did Yuan Xian's actions harm the people of Qinzhou, but he also caused his lord, Huang Song, to bleed. I don't know how Bogeo will react when he finds out. I guess he'll have to prepare a quick heart reliever. No, I have to get someone to prepare a banquet to celebrate. Feng Jin was most afraid of listening to Jiang Pingji's lewd words because he could not understand many of them. They were on two completely different channels. Yang Si listened with great interest. He could roughly guess the meaning of every lewd word from the context. The more he listened, the more he found it interesting. He felt that when he was old, he could write a biography specifically to recall his lord's lewd words. Maybe he could leave his name in history. Feng Jin looked at Jiang Pingji helplessly. His lord was an adult in her 20s. Why was she still so lively? Even if he took pleasure in other people's misfortune, he could not show it on the surface. He could just laugh in his heart. If he really could not take it, he could go back to his room and laugh. Jiang Pingji continued, if Yuan Xian was not a member of the Yuan family, perhaps Bogeo would suspect that I sent him undercover. Yuan Xian was really capable of tricking his teammates. Feng Jin said, my lord, this is a good opportunity to take down the entire territory of Qinzhou. Yes, I know, Jiang Pingji said, counting the days I've been sick, for almost 3 months. It's time for me to recover. My trusted subordinates know that I'm pretending to be sick, but the soldiers and the people don't know. If I don't show up for a long time, people will be anxious and it will be easy for the enemy to take advantage of the situation. If she had waited longer, there might have been rumors that Jiang Pingji had died of illness. Jiang Pingji was very clear about the situation of her own forces. She used forceful methods to suppress those ambitious fellows and cut off their path to pursuing benefits. If she continued to be powerful, the other party would obediently lie low. If she showed signs of weakness or was unable to do as she wished, the other party would rise with the wind. This was a process of competition where one party would weaken while the other would strengthen. Jiang Pingji did not want them to lose control. Unbeknownst to them, the forces in Hu County were already ready to make trouble. Feng Jin said, my lord, you mean? Jiang Pingji said, I have to go. You, Officer Meng, and the others will be fully in charge of the matters in Qinzhou. Qinzhou's vitality had been greatly damaged. It had no ability to cross the gorge and attack Cangzhou. Jiang Pingji had no more worries. Feng Jin said, I understand. I won't let you down. Just as he was rubbing his palms together and preparing to deal with Yuan Xian, someone unexpectedly beat him to it. Yuan Xian's troops did not manage to retrieve the rations. They did not even see Hua Yuan. He was frustrated and irritable. Yuan Xian felt that he was too ashamed to face Huang Song after losing such a good hand of cards. Alcohol was a good way to vent one's emotions. Yuan Xian was an alcoholic, so naturally he was no exception. However, Yuan Xian's alcohol tolerance was not very good. He liked to lose his temper after drinking. He would beat, scold, and humiliate people at every turn. Almost no one dared to get close to him when he was drunk. Nie Sun knew this very well. Logically speaking, Nie Sun should have stood up at this time, but Sun's injury is very serious. The military doctor said that he needs to rest quietly until the wound heals. Otherwise, there will be a hidden danger that it will relapse and tear again. Nie Sun's face was pale. He could not hide the worry between his brows. The general has been drowning his sorrows in alcohol for several days. If the enemy takes the opportunity to attack, it's a small matter if we lose our lives, but I'm afraid that we will fail to live up to the Lord's expectations and lose the entire Qinzhou. I have a presumptuous request, and I hope that the 2 deputies can agree to it. Can you help me urge the general to drink less and pay more attention to military affairs? If this is successful, I will be deeply grateful and recommend both of you in front of the Lord. Just helping to persuade the general to drink less could make the military counselor owe them a favor? The 2 deputies were quite tempted and immediately agreed. Chapter 1282. The 2 deputies happily agreed, but when they met Yuan Xian, they realized that Nie Sun's favor was not so easy to owe. Yuan Xian was a violent drinker and had a terrible alcohol tolerance. He often beat people to vent his anger. Sometimes he was ruthless and a life might be lost. The soldier who delivered Yuan Xian's food was 2 steps late, and the food was a little colder than usual. He flipped over the food table in anger. Even a lowly soldier dares to neglect me. How infuriating. Yuan Xen was drunk and his chest was filled with burning anger. The pawn had missed his meal because of his abdominal pain. From Yuan Xian's point of view, even a pawn was bullying him and making trouble for him. Thinking of this, Yuan Xian's killing intent soared. He pulled out the horsewhip hanging from his waist and whipped the soldier to death. By the time the two deputies heard the news and rushed over, the soldier had already been whipped to the point where he no longer looked like a human. His skin and flesh were split open. The two deputies remembered Nie Sun's promise, and their greed for the future overcame their fear. They pulled Yuan Xian from the left and right. What they didn't know was that Yuan Xian's strength increased after drinking. After accumulating strength, he broke free from their shackles. "How dare you? Do you want to rebel and disobey me?" Yuan Xian was too arrogant and could not tolerate anyone challenging his authority. His already violent and dark emotions were released to the maximum because of the alcohol. The two deputies did not help him but helped the soldier stop him. Wasn't this a sign of betrayal? Yuan Xian was drunk. In his mind, he thought of Hua Yuan fooling him and the lost provisions. His violent emotions overflowed. "Even you, two lowly beasts dare to disobey me?" Yuan Xian hiccuped and rolled up the horsewhip with a grim smile. "You don't want your dog's head anymore, do you? Men, take them down." The two deputies knew that Yuan Xian had a bad temper after drinking, but it wasn't to this extent. When the two of them heard Yuan Xian's slanderous and insulting words, their expressions changed. Yuan Xian could use the excuse of being drunk as an excuse, but what he said just now must be his true thoughts. He just hid it well and did not show it. Now that he was drunk, he released the most brutal and real beast in his heart. The faces of the two deputy generals were ashen. They knew that Yuan Xian did not like to get close to martial artists of common birth and rarely promoted generals of this line. He preferred to get close to trusted aides that he had personally pulled up, but they did not expect Yuan Xian to have such thoughts. It was too chilling. There was no such thing as the coldest, only the coldest. They would never be able to guess what Yuan Xian would do when he was drunk. They couldn't guess the result, but Nie Sun had an idea. Otherwise he wouldn't have chosen them. Yuan Xian hated martial artists who were born as commoners. When they were rational, they still knew how to put on an act. But when they were drunk, they lost all rationality. He had always disliked these two deputies, but they had been promoted by Huang Song, so Yuan Xian could not openly suppress them. Now, Huang Song was not there, and no one could suppress the drunken and violent Yuan Xian, which made Yuan Xian's negative emotions explode to the maximum. The two deputy generals had also done something Yuan Xian hated. Not to mention a beating, a round of scolding was unavoidable. Not only did Nie Sun understand Yuan Xian, but he also understood the two deputy generals. The two deputy generals were the most hard-working among the commoners. They were of low birth and had the ambition to climb up the ranks, so they could not stand others talking about their birth. Extreme inferiority would give rise to extreme self-esteem. Yuan Xian had repeatedly challenged their bottom line, so it was only a matter of time before the three of them killed each other. What did Nie Sun do? All he did was gather the three fellows who were prone to explosive reactions together. However, even though Nie Sun had calculated the whole situation, Yuan Xian's degree of cooperation still surprised him. "Hiss, this boorish man is so violent." The two deputy generals went to stop Yuan Xian, but he unexpectedly exploded and killed the two of them. It was not that they could not subdue Yuan Xian, but because of their status, they could only passively take the beating. When the barbed whip hit their bodies, a bloody groove would appear with each lash. The two of them asked for some medicine from the military doctor and applied it on their wounds. It hurt so much that their muscles twitched, and their facial nerves went out of control because of the pain. "You and I have been indebted to our master, so it is our duty to be loyal to him." What is Yuan Xian? Why should we suffer from his anger? The other person's injury was lighter. He was luckier and was only injured, but he looked much better than his companion. The first deputy general frowned and sighed helplessly. Don't say any more. This Yuan Xian is not much better than us. Who asked him to have good eyes and reincarnate well, becoming our master's uncle? If this matter blows up, we will be the ones to suffer. It is not worth it. If they could bear it, then bear it. They had to lower their heads when they were under someone else's roof. If they wanted to make a living, they could not afford to offend someone like Yuan Xian. Who knew when he would make things difficult for them? Yuan Xian, this boorish man, is the most vengeful. If we offend him today, who knows what kind of humiliation we will suffer in the future. The second deputy general remembered Yuan Xian's humiliation during the day and was so angry that his whole face turned green. He wanted to chop Yuan Xian's mouth and tongue into minced meat. The first deputy general lay on the bed and thought for a while. We are not the only ones who offended Yuan Xian. Why don't we ask the military counselor for a solution? From Yuan Xian's point of view, the two deputy generals and Ye Sun were natural allies. The enemy of the enemy was a friend. The second deputy general frowned and said hesitantly, "Is it okay with the military counselor?" The second deputy general sneered. Yuan Xian almost killed him. If not for the military counselor's luck, he would have reported to the king of hell long ago. If they could use this opportunity to get closer to Ye Sun, the two brothers would have a higher chance of success in the future. Ye Sun saw the two pitiful deputy generals and showed just the right amount of shock and worry. How did the two deputy generals end up like this? The two deputy generals complained to Ye Sun one after another. They were just short of hugging Ye Sun's thigh and crying. They had been targeted by Yuan Xian and hoped that Ye Sun could help. Ye Sun said awkwardly, "This matter? Sun is also unable to help. There is a strong enemy outside eyeing us covetously. This is not the time to cause trouble." The deputy generals felt a chill in their hearts. Ye Sun also retreated. Wouldn't they be killed by Yuan Xian? Ye Sun saw their sullen faces and revealed, "You don't have to worry. Yuan Xian has delayed military plans many times and made big mistakes. He trusted the scoundrels and caused a large amount of food to be stolen. Each and every one of them is a capital offense. If he is punished for several crimes, he won't be able to live in glory for long." The deputy generals were delighted when they heard this, but then they felt a chill. They were at war now. Yuan Xian's matter could only be settled after the war. The two of them were just commoner martial artists without any foundation. If Yuan Xian wanted to kill them, there were too many opportunities. Chapter 1283. The deputies looked at the weak military counselor. They did not have the heart to make things difficult for Ye Sun. After all, the military counselor was also a victim. Ye Sun continued, "Why don't you avoid him for the next 2 days and wait for him to calm down?" The deputies could not have asked for more. They knew to avoid Yuan Xian even without Ye Sun's reminder. Yuan Xian was a mad dog. In front of Yuan Xian, Ye Sun inadvertently brought up the matter of Yuan Xian whipping the deputies when he was drunk and advised Yuan Xian to abstain from alcohol and anger. Yuan Xian was already annoyed. Ye Sun reminded him again, so he directly vented his anger on the two deputies. The deputies could not bear the humiliation and became angrier. They wanted to twist Yuan Xian's head off. Both sides looked at each other with hatred. Ye Sun saw that the fire was good and added more firewood. Neither of the two deputy generals were honorable people. Due to their backgrounds and personalities, both of them were the typical type of people who would act arrogantly once they gained power. In front of Yuan Xian, the deputies were nothing. But in front of the common people, the deputies were high officials who could decide the life and death of a family. On the third day, Yuan Xian was drowning his sorrows in alcohol when a messenger came in to report something. A middle-aged man was crying outside with a roll of straw on his back. He frowned and said angrily, "Send him out." The messenger said, "The old farmer knocked and hid along the road, complaining that someone in the camp had taken his granddaughter and tortured her to death." What? Yuan Xian heard this and calmed down a little. He looked angry. Who dared to violate the military rules? Yuan Xian thought that the army was very strict. His lord Huang Song also forbade bullying the common people. Who dared to commit crimes against the law? How could Yuan Xian sit still when the victim's family had come to his door? It was not that he sympathized with the victim. It was normal for people to die in war no matter how they died. He could not tolerate someone committing crimes under his nose and challenging his authority. Coincidentally, he needed a channel to vent his anger, so he sent people to bring the victim in. The victim was an old farmer in his 40s. His face was weathered, his skin was dark, and his face was full of wrinkles. "I pay my respects to the general." As soon as the old farmer came up, he bowed to Yuan Xian and addressed him as Great General, which made Yuan Xian feel very comfortable. "What difficulties do you have?" Yuan Xian asked. The old farmer bowed again and raised his hand to wipe the tears on his face. With red eyes, he wailed, "I have a granddaughter in my family. She is about to get married, but I didn't expect that a few days ago, a soldier took a fancy to her and forcefully took her. I tried to find a way, but the soldier refused to let her go. He even said that he wanted to take my granddaughter as his mistress. I refused, so I beat him up. My poor granddaughter knelt down and begged for mercy for me, but he beat her to death. Yuan Xing said, "This general's troops are strictly managed. How could there be such a bastard who would forcefully abduct a civilian girl? My sons have all been conscripted. Some died in battle and some are crippled. My daughter-in-law is long gone. My granddaughter is the only one who can do some farm work. Now that I don't even have a granddaughter, what's the point of me living?" The old farmer cried even harder. He said, "That soldier claimed to be a deputy general under the general's tent. He was so arrogant. Even if you gave me 10 guts, I wouldn't dare to slander him." Yuan Xian frowned. He was tipsy. His temper rose. He waved his hand and said, "There are only a few deputy generals under me. I'll call them here for you to see. If what you say is true, I'll stand up for you. If you're lying, be careful of your life." The old farmer cried, "I don't dare to offend the general and the other generals. My poor granddaughter, she died too miserably." A few deputy generals were called over. Recently, Yuan Xian had been too crazy. They didn't know why he called them. Maybe there was something important to discuss. When they entered the main tent, they found Yuan Xian sitting at the head and tail of the tent. A trembling old farmer knelt before him. The old farmer carefully turned his head to look at them. All the deputy generals were confused. Only one person was so scared that his face turned pale. He took a small step back. It was the first deputy general. The old farmer's eyes lit up. He pointed and said, "General, it's this soldier." Everyone looked at him in confusion. Yuan Xian fixed his eyes on him and laughed sinisterly. His eyes were filled with murderous intent. "Are you sure it's him?" The old farmer said, "I'm sure. It's this soldier who took my granddaughter and beat her to death." The first deputy general's face was so pale that it looked like it was covered in a layer of ash. His lips were completely pale. The murderous intent in Yuan Xian's eyes made his heart tremble. He never thought that this old farmer would carry his granddaughter's corpse to the camp to cause trouble. He had done something like this more than once. However, he wasn't the only one who had done such things. In ancient times, the conditions of war were harsh. The soldiers in the camp had to bear the pressure of life and death every day. If they held it in for too long, they would easily get into trouble. They needed a way to vent. At such times, sex became the best way. It could satisfy the body's needs and relieve the pressure. Even if the higher-ups strictly forbade them from disturbing the people, bullying them, and raping women and children, there would always be people who went against the wind and took advantage of the chaos to commit crimes. However, he was already a deputy general and could be considered an official. He didn't need to take the initiative to ask for this kind of thing. The old farmer's granddaughter was given to him by others. He felt that she tasted good and wanted to keep her as a concubine. He didn't expect the old farmer to be so insensible. He wanted to teach him a lesson, but he accidentally killed the old farmer's granddaughter. This matter could be easily suppressed, so why would it be brought to Yuan Xian's attention? The first deputy general's face was ashen. He rolled his eyes and pulled out his sword, wanting to silence him. He shouted angrily, "Don't slander me." "You still want to silence him?" Yuan Xian didn't like this deputy general from the start. He suffered from no solid evidence. Now that he had something on him, how could he let it go so easily? Seeing this, everyone instantly understood what had happened. They looked at each other. Yuan Xian boasted that the army was strict, but in reality it was just that. There were many loopholes that could be exploited. Everyone covered up for each other. If Yuan Xian dealt with the first deputy general, the others wouldn't be so clean either. Making a prompt decision, they persuaded Yuan Xian to first remove the first deputy general from his position. They should first lock him up and carefully investigate before making a conclusion. There were so many unruly people now. Who knew if this old farmer had randomly picked up a corpse to blackmail them? Yuan Xian drank a little too much and his mind was in a mess. Everyone persuaded him at once. His head hurt and he could only agree. The first deputy general's heart was cold. When Yuan Xian sobered up, would he still be alive? Why not? Strike first and let Yuan Xian not have the life to pursue this matter. The second deputy general came to visit him. When he heard that he wanted to do something big, he was shocked. "Do you want to die?" The first deputy general said fiercely, "If I don't take Yuan Xian's life, he will take my life tomorrow." The second deputy general's face darkened. He didn't dare to agree. "What? Are you afraid?" The second deputy general said, "I'm not afraid. It's just that if Yuan Xian is killed, what should we do?" The first deputy general said, In these years of war, we brothers have collected a lot of money. We won't starve to death no matter where we go." The second deputy general still didn't move. The first deputy general said, "It's better to be a landlord than now. Marry 8 or 10 women, have a dozen children, and continue the family line." Chapter 1284. Get the wine? Yuan Xen squinted his eyes drunkenly. The skin above his neck was flushed due to the smell of alcohol, and he did not forget to mutter, "Where is he? Where is he? Hurry up and get the wine." He thought he was shouting loudly, but in fact, his voice was as soft as a mosquito, almost coming out from his mouth. Yuan Xen lay sprawled on the bed of the commander, half of his body in the bed and the other half outside. Although the alcohol content of the current wine was not high, and women who did not know how to drink could drink half a bottle, Yuan Xen drank in jars. No matter how good his capacity was, he could not resist drinking like a whale or a dragon. It was common for him to get drunk. At this moment he was very drunk and his body was sweating. He tore off his armor to cool down. It was still hot, so he pulled open his clothes. The alcohol took over his mind and he fell into a deep sleep. In a blur of consciousness, he heard a few words coming from outside. "I have an urgent matter." "Yes, an urgent matter, I must discuss it with the general face to face." The person who spoke was Deputy General B. Behind him was a soldier with his shoulders shrunk and head bowed. The soldier seemed to be very afraid of strangers, and kept looking at the ground without raising his head. It was late, and the soldiers guarding the main tent were also sleepy. They asked a few questions and let them in. Before entering, Deputy General B. did not forget to remind them. "The general has been in a bad mood these days. Keep your spirits up, don't be distracted." The guard smiled flatteringly. "I know, I won't be distracted." Although he said so, when Deputy General B brought people in, the soldiers guarding on both sides yawned lazily, and became even more sleepy. Deputy General B was in the main tent and it was safe enough. The brothers could also take the opportunity to slack off. Deputy General B entered the tent with the soldier. The soldier raised his head and puffed out his chest. It was the detained Deputy General A. A thunderous snoring came into the ears of the two. They looked at each other, walked around the screen from both sides, and entered the sleeping quarters inside the tent. Yuan Xen was sleeping soundly, his chest rising and falling, and his snoring rhythmically. Deputy General A's eyes were fierce and he murmured, "God is helping me." He actually took off his armor. Soon after, he grinned, revealing a mouthful of yellow teeth. If Yuan Xen had been wearing armor that protected all the vital parts of his body, they wouldn't have been able to land a hit on him. Yuan Xen's struggle might have alerted the guards outside. Who would have thought that Yuan Xen would be so cooperative? He was completely defenseless. Wasn't he a lamb waiting to be slaughtered? He winked at Deputy General B. The two of them exchanged glances and understood each other's intentions. The two of them were good brothers who had supported each other until now. They could understand each other with just a look. Due to Yuan Xen's usual intimidation, they didn't dare to openly kill him. Not only did they lighten their steps, they even held their breaths. Deputy General B was only 3 steps away from Yuan Xen. He seized the opportunity and rushed forward. She used her hands to cover Yuan Xen's mouth and nose, then flipped over and pressed down on Yuan Xen's body, using the strength of her legs to press down on his shoulders. Assistant General A also moved. He pulled out the dagger hidden in his bosom. A cold white light flashed in the air, the blade about to kiss Yuan Xen's neck. Yuan Xen felt difficult to breathe in his sleep, and there was a heavy weight on his body. He subconsciously struggled to open his eyes and saw 2 ferocious faces. Yuan Xen was shocked and a sense of danger surged in his heart. Before he could overturn Deputy Commander B who was suppressing him, Deputy Commander A had already raised his sword and cut his throat. Blood spurted out with a puff sound. The two of them were sprayed by Yuan Xen's blood, but they didn't care. Deputy General A increased his strength until the blade was stuck in Yuan Xen's neck bone. Deputy General B turned over, and Deputy General A pulled out the knife and stabbed Yuan Xen's chest a few more times. "Enough, quickly pack up and leave." Deputy General B couldn't stand it and quickly stopped his companion from abusing the corpse. Yuan Xen was already dead. Even if Almighty Immortal came, he wouldn't be able to save him. Why waste time on this kind of thing? Deputy General A retracted his hand and peeled off his bloody outer clothes. Before leaving, he turned his head and spat on Yuan Xen's body. Deputy General B adjusted his expression. His heart was beating like a drum, but he looked as if nothing had happened. The soldier on guard smelled the blood on the two. He raised his eyebrows and was about to ask. Deputy General B smiled bitterly. The general is not in a good mood. I'll go back and apply some hemostatic medicine. The soldier on guard suddenly understood. Yuan Xian was too violent these days. He often beat, scolded, and whipped people. Many people who went in were injured. He looked sympathetically at Deputy General B and let him go without further questioning. The two had just walked a few steps when a soldier on guard opened his mouth in surprise. Just now, I didn't seem to hear any movement in the tent? Deputy General B's heart trembled. He still pretended to be calm and moved forward, but his steps were slightly messy. At this time someone shouted. Quickly take them down, it's a trap. When Deputy General B and Deputy General A heard the words behind them, they immediately lost their sense of propriety and ran forward rudely, bumping into a group of patrolling soldiers. Their abnormal behavior was seen by the soldiers. Whether it was a trap or not, they had to capture them first. Although the two were strong, two fists couldn't fight against four hands. They were quickly captured. At this time someone felt something was wrong. There was such a big commotion outside. Why didn't General Yuan Xian show any signs of anger? He gathered his courage and opened the tent. The thick smell of blood in the air caused his expression to change. He took 3 steps forward to take a look. Ah! A sharp and short scream attracted everyone's attention. Nie Sun had just fallen asleep when he received the news. When he heard that the 2 deputy generals had murdered General Yuan Xian, he was shocked. Disregarding his injuries, he stubbornly went over to take a look. The military doctor could only compromise and let the 2 soldiers support him to prevent his wounds from reopening. Except for certain circumstances, Nie Sun was a very obedient and cooperative patient. His wounds were very deep, but these days he had been obediently recuperating and drinking medicine. Coupled with his young body, the wounds healed quickly. At this time, the wounds had begun to scab and he could occasionally walk a few steps. As long as there were no big movements or violent emotional changes, he should be fine. Why did you murder the general? Nie Sun looked at Yuan Xian's corpse, his eyes filled with shock and fear. Deputy General A had used a lot of force. Yuan Xian's neck had been cut open. The lower half of his body lay on the bed and the upper half outside. Because his head was hanging in the air, it revealed half a bloody cross-section. Blood flowed all over the ground. Yuan Xian was dead. Even as he died, his eyes were wide open, staring unwillingly at the top of the tent. The 2 deputy generals were tied up. Their faces were ashen and their wretched appearance made it impossible to tell that they had once been valiant. Chapter 1285. Deputy General B knelt obediently. His hands were tied behind his back, and he looked as if he had lost his soul. Nie Sun had been recuperating. Of course, it was impossible for him to know what Deputy General A had done. Why did the general want to kill you for no reason? Deputy General A's face turned green, and he could not squeeze out a word for a long time. An insider came forward to explain the cause and effect of the matter. Nie Sun's face turned pale when he heard that. He looked at Deputy General A with a sharp gaze. Forcibly seizing women, brutally killing women and children, violating military discipline, are these all true? Deputy General A was speechless. The muscles on his cheeks wriggled because of the force he exerted. His lips moved for a long time but he did not say a word. With witnesses and material evidence present, he did not even have the leeway to defend himself. What could he say? That he was not the only one who had done it, that others had done it as well, and that they had done no less than him? This was not a reason for him to absolve himself of the crime. There were unspoken rules in the military camp. Otherwise, why would the people secretly call the soldiers military bandits? They wore the clothes of the soldiers and did the dirty work of bandits. Many soldiers who used to be gangsters took advantage of the gaps in the war to secretly rob the people's money. They even rushed into the people's homes to bully women and children. This was a common occurrence. Not only did they bully the living but sometimes they did not even let the dead off. They made a fortune by digging graves. Of course, digging graves was immoral, but sometimes it was an act of helplessness. If one day Jiang Pingji was so poor that she could not afford to support the soldiers, she might create a tomb raiding officer, and embezzle the dead to support the living. The dead would not say a word but the living would be resentful when they were bullied. No matter how many immoral things they had done, as long as it was not reported to the higher-ups, it could be treated as if nothing had happened, turning a big problem into a small one and a small one into nothing. However, this was based on the premise that no one interfered. Now that the victim's family came to ask for an explanation, Yuan Xian would definitely not let go of this opportunity. Deputy General A chose to kill Yuan Xian in order to save his life. He thought that they would be safe once Yuan Xian was dead, but he did not expect the matter to be exposed so quickly. Deputy General A did not say a word, tacitly agreeing with Nie Sun's statement. Murdering the chief general, forcibly seizing women and children, and brutally killing women and children. Do you have any objections? After he finished speaking, Nie Sun ignored Deputy General A and said to Deputy General B, "You conspired with him to kill the commanding general and knowingly broke the law. You should be executed for your crime. Do you have any objections?" Both of their faces were ashen. Nie Sun waved his hand and said in an extremely cold tone, "Men, drag the two of them away and deal with them according to military law." The two of them were taken away. Only then did they come to their senses, and they struggled to beg Nie Sun for mercy, hoping to make up for their mistakes. However, Nie Sun did not relent. It was impossible for him to soften his heart. "What are you waiting for? Take them all away." Yuan Xian, who was the main commander, was dead. Now the military camp was in Nie Sun's hands. He endured his illness and ordered people to collect Yuan Xian's body. Because of the urgency of the war, Yuan Xian's funeral could only be simple. Send someone to inform the lord of the funeral. Just tell him the truth. Nie Sun acted decisively, either cutting off or suppressing a portion of the parasites that had attached themselves to Yuan Xian, then promoting a portion of people to fill in the gaps. A series of movements that flowed like clouds and flowing water gave people the feeling that they were not being given orders in the face of danger, but rather that they had been premeditated for a long time. However, feelings could not be counted. Even if there were people who muttered, they did not dare to say it out loud. Not to mention them, even if Yuan Xian, Assistant General A and Assistant General B were resurrected, the people involved would not be able to say what Nie Sun had done behind the scenes. Even if this was a trap set by Nie Sun, he was still the most innocent person on the surface. Because Nie Sun had prepared for this for a long time, when the main commander was murdered, not only did the army not become shaken, but it strangely became much more stable. Nie Sun continued to eliminate potential threats. Those who committed mistakes were punished severely, and those who performed meritorious deeds were rewarded handsomely. His methods were as swift as lightning, and he did his best to reverse the bad debts that Yuan Xian had left behind. This made people re-evaluate this seemingly gentle and harmless military counselor. After a series of actions, the atmosphere became solemn, and the impetuous morale of the army was barely suppressed. Nie Sun's methods were not comparable to Yuan Xian's. Feng Jin only found out about Yuan Xian's death a few days later. Dian Yin was an honest man and he said whatever was on his mind. He was speechless and sighed, "Yuan Xian died just like that?" Feng Jin smiled and asked, "Otherwise, how do you think he should have died?" Dian Yin looked puzzled. He was no longer the naive person he used to be. He could hear the hidden meaning in Feng Jin's words. "What do you mean, military counselor?" Feng Jin said, "Don't you think that Nie Sun's reaction was too quick?" Dian Yin couldn't help but scratch his head and said, "According to what I know, Nie Sun is Master Yuanjing's son-in-law. Even Master Yuanjing thinks highly of him. How can he be an ordinary person?" Nie Sun was given an order in the face of danger, but he still managed to be so thorough. It can be seen that this person is also a rare talent. Feng Jin laughed and said, "Commandant Dian is also a rare talent. It's rare to see such a pure and innocent heart." Dian Yin was embarrassed and begged for mercy. "Military counselor, please don't laugh at me. What's going on here?" Feng Jin said, "On the surface Yuan Xian died because of the hatred of the two deputy generals, but in reality he died because of Nie Sun's scheme." Dian Yan's eyes widened in shock. "You mean? Nie Sun urged the two deputy generals to kill the main commander?" Feng Jin shook his head and Dian Yan was even more confused. Martial artists use tangible weapons to kill people, while schemers use invisible swords to kill people. Nie Sun is a schemer. Feng Jin said, "Just as the Lord once said, once the ingenious scheme is known by others, it will lose its effectiveness. Similarly, the method of the schemer's murder is not known by outsiders." If Nie Sun crudely ordered the deputy generals to kill the main commander, then when he executed the deputy generals, wasn't he afraid that the deputy generals would bite him before he died? The more ingenious and secretive the scheme, the higher the success rate. At the same time, It could protect the schemer's own safety and interests to the greatest extent. Feng Jin said, Yuan Xian's death can't be separated from Ye Sun, but no one has evidence against him. The only 2 witnesses were sent to the King of Hell a long time ago. Dian Yin shuddered after hearing this. Feng Jin said, I also don't have evidence, but all kinds of coincidences point to Ye Sun. When there are too many coincidences, it won't be a coincidence anymore. Dian Yin couldn't help but be speechless. Murdering the main commander? Ye Sun isn't afraid of Huang Song coming after him? Huang Song was originally a suspicious person. Yuan Xian's death seemed to be well-deserved, but after a thorough investigation, Ye Sun would definitely be suspected. Not having evidence doesn't stop a person from being suspected. Feng Jin said, there's news that Ye Sun sent his wife and daughter to the Yu family in Wanzhou. He's all alone now. He's barefoot and not afraid of wearing shoes. What's there to worry about? There's a prerequisite for Huang Song to come after Ye Sun. He has to win against the Lord. Looking at the current situation, does Dian Yin think that Huang Song has a higher chance of winning? Rather than saying that Ye Sun killed Yuan Xian to vent his anger and revenge, it's better to say that he staked everything on one throw and went all out. I don't know if Huang Song is worthy of Ye Sun's painstaking scheme. Without Yuan Xian restraining himself, Ye Sun could completely protect Qinzhou. Unfortunately, you're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.